Hey guys and welcome back to my channel. This is part 3 of What If Naruto Was in Elden Ring. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and also go and support the author, link in description. Naruto pressed his lips into a thin line, his countenance in sharp juxtaposition to the homey atmosphere of the current local. He found himself sitting atop an old but well-maintained and comfortable couch in one of the many sitting rooms that composed Renala's personal apartments as headmistress of the academy. The light that streamed in through the strangely small windows was weak, the sun lethargically waking up into early morning. Most of the room's light was being thrown out by the roaring fire in the hearth that warmed the room despite the gloom in the air. He felt someone squeeze his hand and turned to see Renala giving him a wan smile, one that grew a little warmer when he squeezed her hand in return. He liked it when she smiled. It made him feel like he was immersing himself in a crisp and cool stream, washing away the lethargy of sleep and bad feelings. While Naruto had been quick to get dressed, the Queen of Caria, and my fiancé, he mentally reminded himself, still wore her bedclothes. Her tall, regal form was wrapped in a dark blue silk dressing gown and her inky black hair in a simple ponytail that trailed down her chest. Given the early hour, she was not the only sleepily attired person in the so-called family room. Rani, Melina and Selen sat on another couch looking annoyed, curious and fretting respectively, almost arranged in ascending height order. The last of their group was perched on an ornate ottoman between them, her gold eyes looking downcast as she moped sullenly. Millicent, Naruto chose his words carefully yet gently, drawing the little redhead's gaze before she looked away in what could be called shame. You can talk to us, no one here is going to turn you away. When the Crimson Cherub had arrived distraught in their bedroom last night, the odd couple had decided to have an early night, keeping her nestled between them as they had slept, curled into a tight ball as she muttered nonsensically to herself in and out of sleep, and while their gentle ministrations had calmed her to sleep they had yet to make sense of any of it all. Sleep came fleetingly for Naruto, both out of concern for his young charge and consternation that what had started out as a private tryst between him and Renala had quickly turned into a family sleepover. Throughout the night, they were joined by the other trio of pseudo-siblings who had taken up childish vigil over their weeping number. Ever the magenta-haired harridan, Melina had crawled under the covers to spoon Millicent from behind and hug away her nightmares. Even as she had slept, Naruto couldn't help but find the determined look on her little sleeping face endearing. Bold as brass, that one, kinda like me but huggier, he mused silently, seemingly ignoring the act that he was also hugging 3 separate people at the time. Selen had been next, caught between her weirdness at being so close to her parents, and concern for her apprentice. She had curled up at the foot of the bed. As the newest addition, Rani had settled on a pragmatic approach and slept on an armchair beside the bed. But that was then, and this was now. Naruto caught Rani looking around. It seemed she was still getting used to having moisture in a flesh eye again for the first time in centuries, her pout radiating stubborn indignation. She looked again and again at the presence of a particular silver band sitting proudly on her mother's left ring finger. She knew that Naruto and her mother were courting, but objections were natural. The spiky-haired young man watched in amusement as something cold and wet nudged one of Rani's hands, Radagon's wolf fixing her with a knowing stare that told her to focus on the matter at hand. The wolf was right even if it couldn't speak, this matter with Millicent required all of their focus. Last night, you told us that they were coming for you and that you remembered, he stated when he was sure Millicent was open to speaking. I don't want to remember, Millicent replied, balling her little fists, but Naruto's searching look bore down on her like the ocean. I don't want to, Papa, she hiccuped. I know, Millicent, I know. But you can't let what you're afraid of rule you, and if the burden is too much to bear, then those around you will help you lift it. Naruto leaned forward in his seat, so let us help and speak your mind, kiddo. Sage knows sometimes I talk too much, but I'm a good listener when push comes to shove. She looked up into his whiskered face and he could see her every thought written on her face. Doubtless she was wondering just what dimension did the greater will hail from to think that this warm and welcoming aura that sought not but to enrich the lives of those he cared for could ever be a beast, Elden or otherwise. She took a deep breath before speaking quietly, okay. And speak she did, airing her secrets like so much dirty laundry. She told them of her true identity as a daughter of Malenia, who had been blighted by the rot that festered in the walls of her body. That it had driven her to such desperation, that she was in turn forced to make a Faustian bargain with the greater will in exchange for a body and mind that would not be gnawed on by the rot and leave her either a gibbering mess or repulsive sycophant of another outer god that dwelled in the form of the long-lost blade of Miquella. On and on it went. Naruto felt his nails dig into the palms of his hands until they slowly bled when she described how the followers of the Golden Order had derided and purified her body to be consecrated by the will, missing that Rani had a similar reaction in balling all four of her fists. It blessed me then, reshaped my body into what you see now and sent me to Liurnia to see you, Papa. She said forlornly, her usually tinkling voice sounding sour on the air. What for? The blonde asked, his voice level and sincere, giving the girl his undivided attention. She shook her head, to guide you, to put you on a path that would lead you to the Erdtree and rip the remnants of the Elden Ring from the Queen Eternal's form. Renala's eyes turned flinty at that bit of info and the gold-eyed girl shrank from the gaze, assuming it was aimed at her. But I didn't, she babbled quickly. In the euphoria of a renewed body and mind, I lost myself. My memories became fogged and clouded, and it was only when I helped Selen scry, the feathered-haired sorceress cringed, that I remembered everything. Renala extended her arm and stroked her adopted daughter's cheek with the back of her hand. Be at peace, little raptor, she soothed, having taken to referring to many of her new children to types of birds much as she did with Rani. Selen's ill-fated tapping beyond her ken is not your sin, nor will you be punished for it. She sent a sideways glance at the barefooted sorceress, who knew that this wasn't over by a long shot. Silence fell over the family room for a few moments as they digested the reveal about their resident redhead, Rani eventually breaking the silence. Steepling her four hands, Rani mulled over the problem before positing, it's likely that the will did not fathom the change in cognizance that would accompany the form and the cognitive dissonance its herald. Thy mind blocked the recollections as a phalanx against reality. Returning to youth shrinks thy emotional thresholds. Perking up at the talk of greater mysteries, Selen answered, yet have we not also been rendered to childish flesh again? Why do our intellects remain mostly unimpeded? A score of variables are at play here, Selen. But if I were to make an educated guess, it would be due to our shared experience of living without physical bodies for so long. We are familiar with shifting the soul as if it were a body, so the childish innocence we are currently blighted with, she grimaced, while present, is not as much an issue. Naruto filed that bit of information away for later. If anything, Selen was the most enigmatic of the girls, and there were questions he would later get answers to. The full moon queen tapped a finger to her chin in thought. Something about all this rings bizarre. No. My beloved and betrothed would never kowtow to the whims of that celestial quim, yet still it attempts to guide him to take the Elden Ring, creating new greater runes as well, she said, working through the problem in her head and not seeing an immediate answer. I don't care what the will wants, to hell with it and the boon it gave me, I refuse to give up Papam or Mother or any of you. Selen glowered, the words not sounding right coming out of a child. That's not what you're so afraid of, though, is it? Naruto asked rhetorically, his eyes shadowed by the dancing light of the fire, twin glowing blue orbs amidst the gloom. Shaking her head in negative, Millicent gripped one of her own arms and felt a full body shiver rip through her, every nerve in her physical form sparking in revelation. When Selen and I scried, I saw many things that make no sense, images and instances of past and potential futures, but there was one horror in the present. I touched the minds of my sisters. You did, but I didn't feel anyone poking my brain, only Mama does that when I'm asleep. Melina burbled in innocent curiosity, the reality of her words ignored by the others. Millicent looked at the magenta-haired girl and grimaced, not you, Melina, my biological siblings. I reached out and touched their minds half the world for the first time in nearly 20 years. Melina's face lit up like a Christmas tree, more sisters. Papa, can we? Her words were cut off when Millicent surged to her feet, hollering at the top of her lungs. No. Recoiling from the outburst, Melina looked at her sister in fear and confusion, upset by the angry rebuke. They are not in their right minds and never have been. Her voice peaked in distress, reaching a wild, almost shrill note. They are children of the rot who vaunt their own wretchedness as a badge of honor. They care for nothing more than awakening our mother, and seeing her bloom, unleashing a tide of rot that will redden the sky and make what she did to General Radon look like nothing more than a small fever. And now they come for me. She whimpered, hot tears gathering in her eyes. They will come and they will rot me, stripping me of what makes me. Me. They'll make me give up the secret of the Haligtree and make me coo in glee as I rot Papa and make his hair bleed red. I would rather die than give any of you up. And that was his cue. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and Millicent's world became full of warmth, peace and life. She looked over her shoulder and saw Naruto's face looking into hers, an open invitation. She did not resist the feeling, letting her tears burst the dam and pour down her face, burying her face into his shoulder and making promises and asking for help with every shuddering breath. Her whimpers were akin to so many knives in his chest, each sound igniting so many emotions he couldn't quantify all them all. Hopefully his words would suffice. I won't let anyone hurt you, even if that person is you hurting yourself. The dam broke and little Millicent wept, openly bawling as Naruto rubbed comforting circles into her back before the emotional exhaustion of the outburst finally caused her to slip into slumber. He picked her up gently and laid her beside Melina, Selen protectively holding her sleeping hand. Naruto gave the scene one long look before turning and making his way to the door, lifting his twin blades and strapping them over his back. Was it just him or were his ears ringing? No, it didn't matter, his path was clear. Take care of her, would you? He flicked a quick glance Selen's way. I'll be right back. He set off at a brisk pace before anyone could think to ask what he intended, exiting the apartments of the headmistress and walking through the towering edifice of the academy with his mind made up. With each step he barely restrained the urge to take to the air and smash right through the wards and fly over the lands between till it was but a blur beneath him. He felt Kurama roused by his building anger at the back of his mind, but a curt, "Stay out of it," was all he gave the great fox before preemptively cutting the link. By the time he had descended the last line of steps and crossed the courtyard towards the academy gates, his hands were practically morphing into claws. He was angry, very, very angry. In fact, he didn't know why he was so full of rage right now, but his tempestuous fury was not a good thing to let out anywhere near civilization. A glow of blue light at the large wooden gates brought him to a stop, and Naruto watched as a figure stepped out of the haze in a swirl of blue magical particles. Renola stood before him, still wearing her blue silk dressing gown that rustled in the morning breeze. She fixed him with a stern look. Neat trick, he jested without mirth, though seeing her did take the edge off the building fury. Why thank you, a perk of the new wards that I did emplaced after recovering from sparring with Rani, it makes getting around the academy much easier, no? She said the last bit rhetorically, her tone equally lacking in humor. Far better than walking, I find. He couldn't bring himself to respond. They remained like this for a long time, seconds stretching out slowly like a nail drawn across a blackboard. Where art thou wandering to, Naruto? Renola said finally, stepping towards him. Out, he grunted stiffly. She approached him until she stood before him at her full height, a head taller than him. For what reason? She asked redundantly. Clearly she knew the reason why, but wished to hear him say it. Naruto closed his eyes, breathed in through his nose, and exhaled sharply, because I'm angry and would rather you not see the results. Renola nodded, then eyed the moonlight greatsword sheathed on his back. I think not. What? He questioned, confused. At this point, he was so used to Renola's antiquated speech that the simple proclamation caught him flat-footed. I think not. The queen punctuated each word for emphasis. Thy engagement present's first action shan't be done in anger. It is to be used to defend our family, understand? Oi, he growled. He made to walk past her, but her arm barred his path and took hold of his chin with her fingers. Let me pass, Renola. No, I shan't. She stared back at him placidly. Speak your mind, betrothed, let your words wash over me. Naruto tried to look away, but the sorceress's hand was surprisingly strong. Letting out a huff, he began to speak. I'm angry. Someone I care for, who came to me for safety. He looked at her mildly bemused face and huffed. Our daughter is terrified that her siblings now hunt her, and the great golden gallbladder in the sky tried to turn an innocent woman into a trap for me. It takes a lot to truly bring me to anger, Renola, and right now, I'm fucking pissed. Her face softened. Our daughter, yes. So as thy betrothed, I am inclined to ask several questions, if you'll permit it. She said, taking his silence as permission to continue. Do you know where these daughters of Rod are? He shook his head. And do you know the machinations of the Greater Will beyond the fact that it has the tailor to supplant Marika? No, he answered truthfully. She gently turned him so he looked back into the heart of Raya Lucaria. And, can you truthfully say that you are not needed here? Naruto looked down, his shoulders slumping. I can't. Renola slowly drew him into her arms and rested her chin atop his head. No doubt she could feel the micro-movements against her breast, emotions thundering under the surface, but she held on, soft as gossamer, hard as steel. Thy wrath does thee credit, my love. But hearken and heed my heart that beats for you. Hear its song. Exasperated and mildly embarrassed though he was, the blonde reluctantly did as he was told and rested his head against Renola's chest as she held him, starting to hear the strong but gentle thump of her heart in her chest. It was an even rhythm, one that served to douse his flames of anger, drawing her deeper into her embrace. I lost one family to the strings of gods, I shan't lose another. She lifted his face to look into her dark blue eyes, filled with fathomless pain and haunting beauty. O Elden beast who fell from the sky, star that courts the moon, we shall hold them all close and defend them till time itself ceases to tick. In that time, know that you are mine. Moisture built at the corners of Naruto's eyes. Renala's face slowly lowered. You may say it, if you wish. Naruto gulped, a lump in his throat. Heat crept up the back of his neck. Say the words, she encouraged, not commanded him, merely urging him to speak his heart's desire. I am yours. And just as celestial bodies are drawn to one another by the invisible dance of gravity, Naruto and Renala's lips met, capturing one another in a searing kiss that had both of their toes curl. They held one another in the light of morning as Renala gently guided Naruto's temper back into its proper place and then continued on for the sheer fun of it, making up for being interrupted the prior night. Their hands raked over one another, and Renala was not subtle in her lip play, soon turning open mouth and wet. Naruto eventually ran out of air, but Renala rang every last second and sensed out of their kiss before breaking away, both left panting. Naruto breathed in, still in the taller woman's arms. Whoa! He said dazedly, causing his fiancée to chuckle. Nuzzling her face against his, she whispered in his ear, hath beauty calmed the beast? He settled on an enthusiastic nod, not wanting to risk her deepen the public affection lest it rouse another beast entirely. A tap then came at the gates, sounding small and desperate. It seemed to Naruto that someone small was trying their hardest to pound on the oaken gates for attention, not as a means to break in. He and Renala untangled from each other, and he blushed. We should probably get that, ahem, he coughed into a fist. Renala giggled before summoning her catalyst with a flick of her wrist and tapping it to the cobbled stone floor, releasing a sharp chime. The hinges of the great oak gates, each as thick as Naruto's torso, were highlighted in blue before the gates swung open to admit whoever was there. Hello, called the enfeebled voice of a young woman. Is anyone there? I can't see. Oh Lord, protect me, I really am lost. Due to the perpetual water of the lakes, it was common in Liurnia that the morning light was accompanied by a thick shroud of mist rising from their surface, and in this case, it served to shroud the speaker completely. A shadow shambled through the mist before tripping over herself to reach the threshold, letting out a thankful bleat when Naruto caught her. She was a pretty woman of average height wearing one of the strangest attires he had ever seen, her platinum blonde hair worn in a ponytail alongside an amorphous long-sleeve dress that trailed to the ground, thoroughly soaked through. Despite its red tinge, Naruto would have sworn it was made of burlap, held close to her waist by a simple yellow rope belt. He helped the young woman stand, noting she wore a pair of long leather riding gloves in supple black leather. The most obvious and striking thing about the pretty yet bedraggled woman was that she was blindfolded, a strip of yellowing medical gauze was wrapped over her eyes. Thank you, kind sir, the newcomer enthused. I thought I would starve. Can you see me? He waved a hand warily before her face, squinting in the mist. Hello. I cannot. The blindfolded woman wobbled on her feet. Pray tell, who is there? I seem to be quite lost. Is this Castle Morn? Naruto and Renala exchanged a baffled look between themselves, not entirely sure what to say to that effect. The latter found her voice before the former. It most certainly is not, dear girl. You are in Liurnia. Oh, her voice warbled a little. It looked like she might cry. I'm sorry, it seems I'm lost. What happened to you? Naruto asked after Renala mouthed the words, Weeping Peninsula, to him. That's about 300 leagues between here and the Weeping Peninsula. And your name, lady? Oh, you're right, good sir, I'm Irina, daughter of Edgar, vassal to Lord Godric. Naruto stifled a pained expression at the mention of the grafted as Irina gripped herself at the memories. The servants, they rebelled. My father spirited me out of the castle, but my couch was massacred on the Bridge of Sacrifice. Slowly, Naruto looked down to the hem of the young woman's dress and saw that her feet were in bad shape, a rough black and blue and caked in dried blood from walking for so long. Do come in. Naruto arched a brow. What? Renala hummed a little. The little ones could stand to have a babysitter now and again. Babysitter. The poor girl could barely see, much less walk. You must be made of stern stuff to walk this far in a blindfold, Irina, he said, lifting the young woman onto his back to carry her over the threshold despite her weak objections. She made a nonchalant gesture with her hand, unknowingly accidentally smacking him in the back of the head. Oh no, I am quite the coward, I could not have gotten so far were I not saved by that old hunter. Old hunter? Naruto questioned, accepting Renala's hand when she offered it. Yes, an old man. The young maiden tittered. He said he was hunting the moon, but he cut down the misbegotten like a thresher does wheat. She paused. At least I think he did, it certainly sounded like it. Naruto adjusted her on his back, making a good pace as the doors to the academy swung shut behind them. Perhaps he should have listened to her rambling words. 0.0.0.0. Kaled. The word was simple. Uncomplicated. Brief, even. Brief was good. Compared to the many other realms of the lands between, it seemed the odd one out in terms of its name, and once in the distant past, it might have been considered a novelty. Nothing about the Kaled of the here and now was novel, the word itself was tainted by the rot that squirmed through the land like a conceptual blight. Once a person said they had come from Kaled, most would recoil because it meant one of two things. Either they carried with them the horrid rot that the shattering had spilled onto the world, or they were strong enough for the monsters that lived there to not harm, a beast all of their own. Beast. Such a nostalgic term, muttered German under his breath, enjoying the echo through the air. The first hunter strode purposely through the red wastes of the province he had found himself in, each off-step a hollow clack, from the galvanized tip of his peg leg, its stump ached with every use. He relished the feeling. Sensing movement, the old man sidestepped, gracefully allowing a lunging monstrous crow to pass him by with a shriek, unclipping the long, curved length of his burial blade and sweeping up to cleave the head of the creature in a sole, clean arc. By the time the two pieces of decapitated poultry had hit the ground to splatter the red sands with their corrupted offal, German had replaced the blade and continued his walk, not even breaking stride. Looking up at the sunless sky, full of angry red grain, he tipped the brim of his leather hat to shade his sharp eyes and spared a thought to his findings since he had come to the lands between. After many epochs held prisoner in the hunter's dream by the moon presence, another, decidedly more eloquent and infinitely more infuriating, outer god had stepped forwards to offer him freedom in this new land. His task, the same as it had always been, was to hunt. He was not immune to the irony that he had been asked to hunt the moon. It was an old tactic in hunting, war and politics alike, play on someone's existing grudges to ensure they do what you desire, and German was hard-pressed to say he didn't want to save some poor sod from being trapped by the moon like he had, but a hunter was a hunter, even in a dream, and German, the first hunter, was no fool. Certainly, he had been dispatched to hunt a queen of the moon, and he had already accepted his payment in the form of this freedom from his imprisonment, so he would see to it. But no one ran into an enemy animal's territory without first thoroughly learning everything they could. Upon emerging on the Altus Plateau, he had been greeted by a company of priests who welcomed him, begging him as a servant of their god. He had blown their craniums open with quicksilver shot before they could finish their spiel, the stink of innocent blood rolling off them. He had then explored the land, learning its eccentricity and everything else he could about this new theater of the hunt. But his issue was a combination of curiosity of being too curious and being, at his heart no matter how old and jaded a good man. But by the blood he would murder whichever overly can-tripping jackanape had invented illusory walls and teleportation chests. Twice now, I have been slingshotted across this continent by those Thumerian damned arcane containers. He grumbled aloud, used to talking to himself. After getting his bearings, he had thought it best to secure some local supplies and discovered a cavern hidden behind an illusory wall in a cave, and in his experience, interesting stuff was always stored there, so he had cracked open the nearest chest in hopes of unearthing something of use, only to be enveloped by a white fog that spat him out in the Weeping Peninsula. After letting out several centuries' worth of pent-up aggravation in a blue-tinged tirade that would make the loathsome Dungeeter blush, German had calmed down and tried to do some good, even saved a young woman from some beasts that menaced her. Pretty thing, with her blonde hair and kind manners, he hoped she made it to safety. His luck had not improved when finding a second such teleportation chest in the abandoned ruins of Storm Vale that had landed him in the far less pleasant deserts and bogs of Kaled. Filled to the brim with enough beasts, abominations, blood and blight that it made the old man feel nostalgic. It was, in no simple terms, a pain in the ass even with his experience of Yharnam and the dream, but he relished every chance he was given to slice, hack, bludgeon and blast his many attackers into viscera. It had allowed him to get his eye back in as a hunter and knock off the old rust that near a century in the flesh and many centuries in the dream had dulled. Better yet, slicing down the monsters of this god's forsaken place caused his bones and muscles to ache in catharsis. Now, his mind and body honed back to a wicked edge, the old hunter slowly trooped his way in the direction of the coast, seeking to book passage on a ship back to the mainland because there was no way he was turning the teleportation debacle into a hat-trick. He paused in his trek and looked to a distant rise, the wind rustling his lank hair to tickle his ears. There was a strange scent in the air. He sniffed once and picked up something odd. There was a foulness on the wind that cut through the omnipresent scent of rot that clung to Caled like flies to feces. It was a high and coppery smell that he knew, even if this strain of it was twisted in a new direction. Blood. Tattered cloak flowing in the wind behind him, Gurman began to jog in the direction of the blood, advancing to a run, then a sprint when the smell grew more pungent, and the sound of clashing steel and screams reached his ears. He skidded to a stop atop the rise and looked down over the edge, taking in the wondrous horror before him. On the plain near the sea sat a squat and grey castle, one built for function over needless frivolity, standing out against the red of Caled forebodingly despite being the only true bastion of civilization for miles around. A gaggle of figures thronged around the front, hollering their warning in steel and spellfire while several archers, ballistas and trebuchets unleashed missiles at random, a poor excuse for troop maneuvers. But who was Gurman to say? He was more concerned with the 4 people advancing on the castle like crimson wraiths. All 4 were women of similar appearance, separated by a few years of age. All wore the same off-white tunic and faded red breeches tucked into matching boots. Their hair was red, and their skin, where visible, bore a touch of discoloration that spoke of one touched by disease, but it did not diminish their beauty. The shortest of the 4 wielded a curving silver blade that dripped with rot, matched by her partner, who thrust a long, wide spear blade through the spine of one of the defenders. The other 2 had their own unique weapons. One wielded twin short swords while the last and apparent leader wildly flailed with the long shaft of a scythe, its blade a sickle crescent moon. Watching the confrontation, Gurman observed the 4 sisters slowly push into the defending army of bedraggled footmen, knights and pikemen, opening stomachs and rot rising from where they walked. They cast foul incantations from their fingertips, spraying nets of sticky blight that caused those it ensnared to scream, burning through clothing and mail before liquefying flesh as if it were tallow. Some of the men and women were left like this while others had their fading lights defiled, ripped to shreds by the Scarlet Quartet. Others suffered a worse fate. One such man, a tall and broad knight armed in plate and wielding a hammer, was brought to his knees by the leader's halo scythe. He screamed at her as she approached, wrathful and angry, but it evaporated to base begging when she lifted her hand, a vermilion flower sprouting from it that released a glowing vapor. The man began to spasm, his gleaming armor rusting to a pitted and sticky strata as his skin bubbled with pustules, eyes quite literally exploding out of his head. But he was not dead. He twitched, looking in the direction of the bloom as if it were the only thing he could see before lunging forward to eat it from the eldest sister's hand, letting out a mindless roar before getting to his feet and turning on his former ally, another vector of the rot. That, Gurman could not stomach. He could smell it. It was like the old blood from so long ago, the remnants of an outer god, used to drive men mad. But there were no eyes of sight growing on the inside of these poor fools, just rot unending. His mind made up, he leapt into action, seemingly taking flight into the ruddy sky above. 0.0.0. Castellan Jaren was having a bad day. As the old knight twisted his greatsword to sever the spine of one of his blighted brothers in arms, he reflected that it was more accurate to say that he had a bad week. It had started out well. A bumper crop of adventures, hedge knights, aspiring sorcerers and people with death wishes had been tricking into Redmane Castle, and he had hoped that this year, maybe the Radon Festival would finally succeed in putting his general to rest. It had all changed when they came. They being the daughters of Rot. They had emerged from the swamp of Ionia like revenants from an old nightmare, shadows of Melania that spread the rot with each breath. Initially, when they had been reported leaving their putrid home, Jaren had been cautiously optimistic. But when their path inevitably brought them to his door, he found himself forced to rally what remained of his retinue to meet them at the gates to ask their purpose for visiting. Even now the memory was a foul one in his mind. We seek passage to the mainland. We are bound for the lakes. Mary, the blindfolded eldest sister, had said to the bearded witch hunter when he first barred their crossing. For what purpose? He had queried, his old eyes and long beard peeking from under his red hood. Liurnia is long from here, but you can still make it there on foot, it's hardly as if you grow tired. He had been disinclined to offer any aid to the daughters of his general's lobotomizer. The 4 had laughed at him then, a harsh and mocking noise that put them all on edge. We must insist, for you see, we are on a quest that must be fulfilled. Our sister, so weak and lost, has been found. She dwells in the halls of the Full Moon Queen, added Pollyanna, the youngest, her right eye covered by a bandage while her left was glowing a baleful gold. Jaren's hands clenched around his sword at the mention of that, his mood turning foul despite the others continuing. Silly Millicent, pretending she is not one of us, we will find her and see her fester, baptize those she cares for in the lake of rot and make them apostates to our mother, the true goddess who shall bloom thrice and usher in an age of rot. Jaren had hawked back his mask and spat at the sister's feet with Maureen's words, dirtying her tree spear. Your goddess of a mother failed at killing my general, join the Radon festival to finish the job, and I may consider your passage. PFTT, fa ha 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 ha. Their peals of laughter had filled the wastes, indeed, they wound haunt him to his dying day. Silly old man, your general shall rot where he stands, he is a monument to our mother's greatness. Spoke Amy, the third sister armed with her twin swords. We shan't join your festival. Then I am afraid I must bar your passage, scold Spawn, darken Redmane's door no longer. Jaren had proclaimed only for the laughter to intensify. Mary tapped her halo scythe to the floor and grinned like an animal bearing its fangs. No, little man, we sisters may seek passage to Liurnia, but we, as the rot, seek passage into your bodies. Apostates of the true God yet, follow us to the lakes, wring the secret of our mother's location from our sister. Join us and rot. And with that manic, breathy and euphoric proclamation, the battle had begun. The four daughters were mighty indeed, and despite outnumbering them 100 to 1, Jaren's force could not do more than drive them off for a time. While this was his castle, Khalid gave the sisters the home field advantage, unleashing storms of scarlet rot that had whittled away his men and the potential festival participants that had joined the fray. He had seen men and women he fought with for centuries twisted into mockeries of life, cutting down boys no older than 16 who had come in search of adventure. They were coming for him, now. He could hear them. Pushing himself to his feet, weary and tired, Jaren made ready to sprint at the daughters, sorceries spinning to life in his hand and determined to drive steel into their hearts. If today was the day he died, then so be it. Better to die a man than a monster. A black blur screamed down from on high and smashed into the ground before him at speed, kicking up a plume of dust and dirt. With this sudden explosion lull of silence to fall over the field of battle, wondering what had just transpired. The universe answered. A hunched figure slowly straightened up and stepped out of the fog of red dust. It was an old man, attired in leathers and tweed, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and some kind of staff on his back. He looked around himself before settling on the daughters of Rot who looked at the newcomer, their perpetual mania fading for the first time in days. Despite his less than threatening appearance, there was an aura to the man, a disquieting certainty to his movements that instantly set Jaren on edge. Hail, dregs of outer kin, your blood is a most foul thing upon the wind. He greeted the quartet tersely, slowly walking along the battle line. He did not give them the time to reply as he pulled a long, gray, curved blade from his waist and a blocky-looking contraption from his back. Leave this place, run for the wastes, and I shan't feed you your own rotting blood. The sisters four bridled. Impudent old man, the daughters of Rot move for no. I said scram. Had Jaren not been a seasoned warrior and a veteran of the shattering himself, he wouldn't have seen the interloper move. Even so, he nearly gasped at the speed. The newcomer launched himself forwards in a blur of movement, twisting in the air as he went and decapitated no less than 12 of his rotted former men before clashing against the shaft of Mary's halo scythe that she had only just been able to move to block. With an almost lazy flick of the wrist, TTE eldest of the sisters was sent skidding backwards by the sheer force the old man's momentum imparted. Pollyanna and Maureen moved to their sister's defense, running in from either side of her attacker and raising their weapons to skewer him from two angles. His tattered cloak shifted, and his offhand locked around the blocky item on his back, pulling its silvered trigger. The strange weapon barked, spitting fire and punching a silver slug into Maureen while the recoil sent the butt of the weapon into Pollyanna's chin, sending both women staggering backwards. The gray-haired man's head snapped around, the dual swords of Amy bore down on his back, so he turned into his own movement, shoving Mary with the edge of his blade while swinging chunky wood and a metal contraption to break the crisscrossing swords, all in a fraction of a second. With all four of the legacies of Melania sent reeling, he seemed to realize the opening he made was small and kept up his turn, dragging his peg leg along the floor. In one smooth movement, he raised his crescent blade to the gnarled staff that peeked from his shoulder, locking into it and sweeping it into play as one foreboding scythe that he swung with a yell. The blade seemed to go wide, but it was not his intent to bifurcate them. Rather, he caught one of their waists on the scythe before spinning in place, snagging the other three in the embrace, all but throwing them away from him across the desert in a mighty swing. The old man rested his sepulchral scythe on his shoulder, casting an imposing figure. Roaring in anger at being denied, the four daughters exploded with blooms of rot before sprinting back at the newcomer, only to slam into some kind of barrier that rose from the floor. Jaren blinked, wondering if any of the remaining spellcasters that still defended Redmane had had time to conjure some kind of defense, yet despite the rot, the magic did not decay even as the four sisters raged and slammed their weapons against it, unleashing earthquakes from every hit. "Name yourself, old man," Mary raged, her skin rippling with rot. "Oh dear, you are eager little girls, aren't you?" The madman laughed harshly, the rasp of an old warrior who'd recently clawed back some small semblance of his prime. "Clamoring for glory against an old man for bruised pride because your little eldritch power trip has been repulsed." He sketched a shallow bow, heedless of their shrieks. "I am but an old hunter long used to preventing the egress of kin, and I'd gather you are the remnants of said kin." Jaren's old eyes caught a glint of light at the hunter's feet, lines scratched into the earth that glowed dully, they almost looked like some kind of rune. He carved it with his peg leg in that moment, he thought, astonished. "Leave this place," the old hunter spat. "You aren't the quarry I hunt, and I shan't waste my time on little girls who aren't worth my steel." The four sisters growled at him, looking mutinous, but when faced with his peerless prowess and unable to gain entry, they had no choice but to do as he bid. Slowly but surely they slunk away in the opposite direction of Redmane Castle, limping away, living to fight another day. By some miracle, the barrier maintained itself until they were long over the distant horizon. Jaren stroked his beard as he approached his fellow old man who was even now disassembling his scythe. "Thank you, good hunter, your aid was most welcome." "German," the old man said, inclining his hat. "Well met, German." He drew himself up, wincing but a little at his wounds. "I am Jaren, Castellan of Castle Redmane. Please, come inside, it's the least I can offer for saving us in our time of need." "Very well." Welcoming their somewhat grumpy savior into his castle, Jaren looked over at the remnants of his men and cursed inwardly. It seemed the Radon festival would be postponed this year. "What do you know of a witch queen of the moon?" German asked over a canteen of water that the hooded knight had given him. Jaren scowled. I know of who you speak. Renala, queen of the full moon, traitor to her kin." German raised an eyebrow at the comment and gestured for him to continue. "When the War of the Shattering began, my Lord General Radon was rendered incumbent by the rot of his half-sister. And his mother, greatest sorceress in the land, did nothing." "This sounds personal for you," German observed, drawing a grunt from the old Castellan. "Personal, it was. I lived with the Carians for many years, saw that Queen Renala was someone who loved her family beyond all measure, and yet when her sons both fell to their own madness, she did nothing, lost in her insanity, and now, I hear foul things from Liurnia. How she has returned to her senses yet does not come to her son's aid." His hands balled into fists, and now I hear she has taken a daughter of rot, a daughter of the very fiend that rendered her son an invalid, into her home. Whatever she once was, surely what remains can hardly be called human. "Then you are in luck." German had listened to the words, realizing that there was much anger in them that obscured the truth, but there was some genuine reasoning there. Besides, it was the first real lead he had on his hunt. "I've been sponsored to hunt this full moon queen. If it pleases you, Castellan, I would like to book passage to the mainland to undertake it." Jaren looked at the first hunter, seeing his strength had undoubtedly been something, yet the Queen of Caria was a force to be reckoned with. However, he looked out over the castle, what remained of the Radon festival combatants and his men shaving up defenses. They could not undertake the festival this year with so few. But an idea dawned. Mad as it was, he embraced it. "I can get you a ship." He looked at German and hefted his sword onto his shoulder, "and all of Redmane Castle shall embark with you." 0.0.0.0. The shimmering green expanse of the moonlight greatsword swished through the air in slow, deliberate strokes, its song-like chime adding a musical tinge to its passage, like something very large was moving elegantly. The movements were strange to Naruto, different from what little tutelage he had with blades before, but as always, he was a kinesthetic learner. He learned by doing. 1, 5, 8. A basic overhead sent a gale away from him before spinning on his heel to bring the sword around in a horizontal slash that transitioned to a heavenward slice. 1. He swung the sword in another straight along his center line. 2. Naruto heeded the order, letting his building muscle memory execute a diagonal slash from the left. 3. And again from the right. And guard. Bringing the sword up against his body, he turned the flat of the blade out against any would-be attacker, with its witness providing some level of protection in the absence of a proper offhand shield or buckler. He held the guard, noting the curious corona of reflected light that came off his Renela's gift to him. Blade clapped twice in satisfaction, his lupine maw set in a pleased smile. "Not bad, friend. You're getting used to how she handles, I see," he observed, having been Naruto's swordsmanship instructor for most of the day so far. Returning the smile, the blonde broke his guard position and rested the greatsword on his shoulder. "Thanks, she handles way different from Kaiman, though not as clunky as I'd have thought given her size. The Carians are masters at their craft, be that glintstone artistry or sorcery. If it's anything like its Darkmoon kin, I don't doubt she's perfectly balanced from pommel to tip." Blade replied good-naturedly, his own Zweihander dug into the floor of the courtyard they had converted into a training field. The man-wolf's lone eye narrowed in intrigue. "Why did you want my help again?" Naruto chuckled a little at that. Blade was a good boy, indeed, perhaps the goodest of boys, but he seemed to have a bad habit of acting before asking questions when someone needed his help, he could relate. "And here I thought you wanted to get some exercise in." The shadow of Ranni snorted at that, thumping a fist against the metal of his cuirass. "Oh, you've no idea, friend. Much as it was nice to get some rest, albeit under duress, I was getting real tired of that silk shirt. Give me plate and mail any day of the week." After Renela had succeeded in calming Naruto's anger, they'd decided to take a few days to themselves in order to properly take stock of the situation at hand. But something that the queen said had struck a chord with him. She did not want his first use of the Moonlight Greatsword to be in anger, righteous or not. That got him thinking. Did he actually know how to use it? Of course, on the most elementary level, the operations of any sword could be boiled down to stick M with the pointy end, but the blonde had never received formal instruction on how to properly utilize anything bigger than a chakra blade. And so he had come to see Blade to ask if the tall woven warrior would be up to taking on the teacher position. He had been most agreeable to the proposition and soon enough had the blonde running through drills and katas after explaining the first 10 basic maneuvers when using a weapon so big. Yet despite that, Naruto noticed that Blade looked at him with confusion from time to time and finally, his own curiosity boiled over. "Something wrong, Blade?" he asked, stopping from the shadow sparring he and the other man had been participating in. Blade hummed, unsure of the right words to use before finally asking what had been on his mind. "I'm wondering what the point of this all is. You seemed quite adept with that odd black blade when you sent Godric to meet his destined and long overdue end, so what's the need of having me teach what you can't just pick up by yourself?" "Well, how do I put this?" Naruto squinted, the whisker marks on his cheeks strongly evoking the look of the fox he contained. "While I can pick up most skills fast enough, I want to use this thing properly. And well, Kaiman is for killing, and this," he held the sword up in the light, "is to protect. So I best use it properly and for that, I need someone who can teach me without flying apart at the seams when I crank up the power." Blade nodded slowly, accepting the answer. "All right then, we'll take a short break before starting on half sorting. While you're strong enough to twirl that thing faster than a Chris, it's always important to learn how to use such a big sword with as much maneuverability as possible. You never know when it will score a lucky hit, friend." The young man nodded and took a seat on the bench they were using to rest but noticed the lingering mirth resting at the edges of Blade's muzzle, practically bubbling with barely restrained laughter as he looked at the green sword. Naruto raised an eyebrow, prompting the wolf to speak. "Talk to her, did you?" he chuckled, gesturing to the engagement gift and the amusing implications that came with it. "Shut up, Blade, you're still in the doghouse in Renela's book." Naruto rolled his eyes. "Is that the crack of a whip I hear? Oi. .0.0.0. Far above the courtyard, Renela and Ranni found themselves sequestered on a balcony overlooking the area and sat on comfortable couches, enjoying the sun as they watched each of the men in their lives spar. Renela had reverted to type and wore her headmistress raiment sans crown, while Ranni wore a little white dress and white straw hat that her mother had gleefully pulled from storage for her youngest child to wear. Melina dozed quietly in her lap while Ranni read from a notebook quietly, occasionally looking over the pages to look between the sparring boys and her mother as she watched them, a pleased look on her face, her pale cheeks dusting with red when Naruto took off his shirt to reveal his well-muscled chest, caked in sweat that glistened in the light. "Ew," Ranni exclaimed aghast, realizing that her mother was enjoying the show in an adult way, causing the raven-haired queen to look at her princess. "Surely you aren't so craven, mother." Renela's plucked brows knitted into a line before her eyes widened at what her daughter meant. Embarrassment made her blush deepen before she turned up her chin at her daughter. "Oh hush, Rani, I am a woman in my prime, not some platonic form of a virgin that is prohibited from enjoying the show my betrothed puts on." "It's indecent," Rani protested, one hand pointing in accusation, a second covering her face in shock while the other pair balled around the fabric of her dress. "I am perfectly entitled to my own flights of fancy and mental fantasies, thank you very much," Renala defended, taking wry amusement from the note of fluster in her little Culver's voice, finally sounding her age, so to speak. Rani bristled and gestured at her small form. "I am but a child, I should be hearing not a jot of your mental smut," she tried to rationalize before seeing her mother smirk, realizing she had erred. "Wait, no. A child, are we? Then do not resist my motherly affections upon thee." Rani could only flail as her mother easily picked her up and placed her in her lap next to the sleeping Melina, beginning to ruthlessly tickle her. "No ha 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 ha," she struggled, to no avail. "Ah ha 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 ha." Renala, too, laughed, though hers was a far more genuine tenor. This was simultaneously nostalgic and a breath of fresh air for her, and she could feel in the way the blue-haired little girl squirmed that deep down she was enjoying it, too. A part of her did lower its head at Rani's form, long gone from her youth's red hair and gold eyes, but her waking mind conceded it was better this way. While Rani's original body had been the perfect marriage of looks between her and Radagon, there were so many awful memories and painful feelings attached to its visage. "'Tis better this way, fresh, white and born anew, unsullied by the taint of the fingers. Empyrean no longer, a child of Caria once again," the queen thought as she slowly stopped tickling her daughter and came to sit her on her lap, her hands going around her waist comfortingly. Rani pointed up at her with her one eye, her four hands tracing over her mother's hands. The queen thought it must be hard for her, getting used to true tactile sense after so long, though she saw Rani's face break into a frown when her fingers brushed over the ring of betrothal on her left ring finger. Rani looked down at the brushed silver band with unclear emotions, lips thinning to a line. "Dith it bother thee?" Renala asked, aware that Rani might think her relationship with Naruto was progressing too quickly. Rani winced at the question but sighed, shaking her head. "I promised that I would accept all that you are, mother, all that you hath been and will be, thy pain of past and even thy joys yet to come, even if it means that you intend to take your consort as a husband." A beat of silence passed between them before the mother spoke again. "Will you call him father when the time comes?" Rani frowned, squeezing her mother's hands. "I shall try, mother. But some habits are subtle traps, easy to walk into, almost impossible to break." Renala kissed the top of her daughter's head in acceptance. It pleased her greatly, even if a part of her wilted at the evident strain there was there. This was a wound that, while closing, only time would truly heal. "He gives good hugs," she added simply, something that Rani found herself agreeing to. "How is Miss Irina settling in?" Rani questioned. The new arrival to the academy had not gone unnoticed by those others who lived there. Renala sighed sadly at the question. After bringing her inside a few days ago, they had drawn her a bath and let the young woman recover from the physical side of her ordeal, furnishing her with new clothes and a bedroom in which to sleep. Boggart had taken quite a shine to the young woman and had been on hand to give her 3 square meals every day whenever she asked for it. Doing better, there was a letter amongst her scant effects intended for her father. "I am having Moonram run it down to Castle Morn, he should be back in a fortnight or so." Irina was a strange girl, Renala reflected. Sweet and timid beyond measure, yet with an underlying strength to do what she could despite her minor means. She was also very good with the other girls despite her lack of sight. "Did thou intend to maketh a maidservant of her?" Rani asked. After all, Irina technically was the daughter of one of Godric's bannermen. From the outside, it might look like the Carians were staking claim to what was left of the grafted lord's fief. The full moon queen shook her head at Rani's question. "Nay, she is a guest in my house, but if she seeks to become a nanny to the rest of the children, I shan't object." Rani's eye returned to the ring of betrothal once again, and Renala spoke again. "'Tis a pretty thing, is it not?" Naruto asked for one to match. "Truly, isn't that a little effeminate?" Rani said. As far as she knew, the tradition was that only a woman bore a ring. "Art thou sure thou have not secretly been bewitched by a woman in disguise?" "Ha," Renala tittered, appreciating the wit. "Oh, most certainly not. Though were he a girl I wouldn't have objected, for it is his soul that gives me comfort and happiness, regardless of its container." She ran her fingers through Rani's blue hair, feeling the little girl relax into her embrace. "If it amuses you so I could always glamour his form into a woman, I'm sure we'd all get mirth from seeing him in a corset." Until he breaks out of it. The duo laughed at the mental image, as absurd as it was, a pleasant relief from the talk of schemes and machinations in this great game of gods and monsters. A wedding is a pleasant thing to look forward to after so much darkness in the world, Ranni mused, trailing her gaze over the sleeping forms of Melina and Radagon's wolf, both curled up on one of the couches in the sun. A wedding and a coronation, Rennala whispered. Ranni turned to look up at her mother, curious as to what she meant. Shaking her head to banish the current subject, the headmistress turned her attention to Ranni's own projects. What of your work? You've never rested on your laurels, it's how I raised you. Preening a little at the comment, Ranni nodded. I've sent word to my agents through the lands that the academy is a safe haven. IG says he shall make his way here as soon as he can. Good, Rennala had long missed the wise words of the Carrion blacksmith. And on the more personal side, I've started a sorcery that I'm most proud of, Ranni said, voice turning haughty. Intrigued at the prospect of any new variation in the arcane arts, Rennala sat up a little straighter and listened attentively. Do go on, little Culver. She did not turn her head as she heard steps approaching before Naruto and Blythe emerged onto the balcony, the blonde pecking his fiancé on the cheek as he sat down beside her while the shadow leaned against the doorframe. Naruto watched Ranni attentively as she began to explain her new sorcery. After the incident with Millicent, I realized that the chances of connections to other entities and beings beyond our knowledge are present. Not likely, but not zero, given how the will and the presence of so many runes can shift causality along certain patterns, she explained, her hands beginning to go through a series of esoteric movements. A stream of dark blue magical residue followed each of the 20 fingertips, the movements slow and precise given that they were now flesh and unable to assume the impossible angles of her doll body. So I decided to work in a curiously complex cantrip, based upon the astral reconciliation mystery that you used against me to bring me here in the flesh, Mother, Ranni said, a note of playful challenge in her words that her mother met with a smirk. Leave it to her daughter to try and one-up her. Naruto blinked owlishly to Rennala's side, almost all of what she said flying over her head. Translation for the rest of the audience, please. He requested, making Ranni roll her eye. She huffed at him. It means, father. Naruto clutched his chest. U-R-K. That upon casting, it will snag the metaphysical strands that connect us to entities that are not present yet closely tied. Giving us warning if we have to worry about unforeseen spiders feeling the vibrations on our strings of fate without alerting them. Ranni murmured, her focus on completing the spell, weaving the 40 of magical threads between her fingers into a cat's cradle that bore a dark moon at its center before finally clapping all 4 palms together. The magic circle was squashed between them, causing a light blue mist of sparks to expand out from Ranni and wash over all present like a light breeze that sent their clothes fluttering. Other than that there was no physical change, all was well, or perhaps it was. A presence slammed down on all of their shoulders like an anvil, and Rennala felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. Her catalyst appeared in her hands, and she leapt to the other side of the balcony with Ranni safely held against her. She was not alone. Radagon's wolf bounded to its feet and scrambled to the other side of the floor while Blythe drew his Zweihander from his back, ears twitching wildly and lips pulling back in an animalistic snarl. Naruto was now in front of Rennala, his hand on the hilt of the moonlight greatsword, his body tense, corded muscles ready to strike. What is that? He demanded, his voice short and eyes starting to glow. No. His eyes weren't glowing, the runes on his body were thumping with light that radiated through his clothes. Radagon's red wolf stalked forward beside him, a growl rumbling from its throat, its wet snout pointing at the far couch where Melina still slept. I recognize this presence, Rennala thought, her eyes widening in a combination of shock, horror and fury. It cannot be. They all watched, transfixed, as Melina slowly sat up from her rest, Naruto's jacket that she had been using as a blanket falling to the floor as she turned to look at them. Both of her eyes were still closed, and her face was at peace, but there was still movement upon her visage. The black inky seal on her left eye seemed to squirm and swirl in on itself before swimming across her forehead and appearing over her right eye. Slowly, her left eye opened, eyelids peeling back to reveal a light brown eye. Except it was not light brown, it was glowing gold. I could never forget those eyes, Rennala uttered, her catalyst creaking under her hand from how hard she now gripped it. Melina exhaled and looked around the balcony, coming to rest on the group that looked at her so warily. Unforeseen, but not unwelcome, she said, still Melina's voice but a second voice, an older and more regal voice coming in over the top. Naruto took a step forward, his face like thunder. I don't know who you are, but I'm giving you to the count of 10 to get the hell out of my daughter, he said, his voice full of the authority of a father. Melina regarded the blonde, the light of his runes reflected in her eye. Ah, Elden beast, or shouldst I call thee, father in this guise? She questioned before her lips broke into an indulgent smirk. It matters not, for I am, as I shall always be for the lands between, your queen eternal. She tilted her head to regard the lot of them. Might we converse? If there ever comes a time when our objective is out of reach and there is nothing to do, then all that remains for us is to wait. Waiting. It was something that German the first hunter was used to the point where if asked he would say that waiting and hunting were his only two transferable skills. Yet as his withered lips drew back in annoyance, old eyes trying their hardest not to twitch, it was evident that the lank-haired man was no good at prolonged waiting despite his epoch of practice. Standing at the edge of a long wooden jetty that poked from the waters near Redmane Castle, he found his mind seizing upon very abstract observations about his passing of the time, a far better alternative than getting annoyed about how long all of this was taking. In the time that it had taken for the sun to move from the east to directly overhead, he had remembered that he was fond of tapping his foot to pass the time. Specifically, his right foot. He grunted, teeth snapping together at the dull clunk from his peg leg as if the numb approximation of feeling was an insult. He didn't take it as an insult, far from it. He relished the feeling of his own flesh and blood once again rather than the transitory thought form gifted him by Flora. A pair of men shuffled past him carrying a crate of what smelled like oil, likely firebombs or some arcane equivalent. They gave German a curt nod, each carrying a mix of supreme respect and light fear, his handling of the Daughters of Rot having engendered much support from the surviving participants of the abandoned Radon festival. Ever since Jaren had made the proclamation that he intended to travel with the first hunter to Liurnia, there had been renewed cheer despite the death of so many, for while there chanced to send the titular general to his rest, there was still a chance to do a deed all would remember. Bringing the Mad Witch Queen of the Moon to justice. So ever since dawn they had been making preparations to go, packing every piece of equipment, weaponry and supplies onto a large ship and, wine permitting, over 100 adventurers, seasoned and green alike, would be on their way with him at their head. Leading young men and women on what they think is an adventure. How disgustingly nostalgic. German grimaced, his leg aching with phantom head at the memories. He closed his eyes to cut out the happy and excited faces, hoping he would no longer subconsciously see the faces of so many fallen friends in their place, ready to lead them off to gloomy fates once again. It had been a mistake, he instantly realized, for it left him with nothing but the gentle lapping of waves against the jetty, an echo of the worst day of his life. Good hunter. His eyes snapped open, looking over his shoulder to bark at the mechanical facsimile of his beloved. Not now, doll, he said scornfully, only to stop, realizing it was only Jaren. His fellow elder had had time to bathe and freshen up, but his characteristic beard served to banish the phantoms of the doll. Ah, Castellan Jaren, apologies, I was a long way away, Jaren supplied, earning a gesture of assent from German. Neither were the overly sentimental type, and it was clear that when needed the conversation could be kept laconic at best. I hope wherever your mind went it was better than this godforsaken place. German snorted in black humor. That's not the best thing to say about one's own castle, though I can certainly say that Caelid is easily in the top 3 worst places I have ever been. Why, thank you, I can take solace in knowing that there are worse places in existence than Caelid. I was under the impression that this was the rock bottom of the universe. Oh yes, a veritable hunting holiday. Just take in your landscape, you can have it in any color you want, just so long as it's red. He chortled, drawing a chuff of amusement from the bearded fellow as he tightened the straps on his equipment. They fell into pregnant silence then, watching as the ramshackle group of an Albenuric mage, a sentient jar and a dozen strongmen lifted some esoteric piece of masonry onto the bark that would be their chariot. The ship, named the Lion's Pride, visibly dipped a few feet under the waterline at the extra weight. German shook his head, having always preferred to travel light on a hunt, but the Castellan had assured him that the rune-carved rock would be of great help against Renala. What troubles you, German? Jaren asked eventually, his hidden eyes watching the scythe master curiously. We're burdened with the purpose of justice and set to it with strong allies and sturdy wills. He reasoned before pushing on. Will it be a hard battle? Aye, without a doubt. The full moon queen is a mistress of esoterica, but between my knowledge of her ways, our allies' adventurous will and your sublime bladework, we'll bring her to justice. Tipping the brim of his hat to better shade his eyes, the gray-haired member of the pair was about to shrug off the old Castellan's words but could not bring himself to do so. It puzzled him, thumping like an old wound that he had packed behind so many eons of ennui that he reflexively tried to banish it from his mind. Finally he spoke, his voice still terse but with an undercurrent of tenderness there. "I hate the sea," he proclaimed banally, hoping that Jaren would let it lie. Or at least make some black humor that could pass the time. Instead he was left with a level and thick silence, a nonverbal urging to speak his mind, and as Gurman considered it, he believed that Jaren deserved that much. He took a deep breath before speaking and kept his cadence sincere and uncorrupted by centuries of self-hate. "Many years ago, a plague of beasts came to my land and caused great terror. At first we could do nothing but try to endure the attacks until one day I stood and said no more. We would not be hunted, we would hunt those who terrorized us and burn the plague out at the root. At first it was just me, hardly the most imposing sight the first time I took up a farming implement to hack a beast to its stinking guts, but with time others joined and we ceased being the hunted. We were the hunters, though I suppose we are the old hunters now." Water lapped at the jetty, the red light of the sun glaring down balefully at them as they loaded men and weapons alike, sound falling away till Gurman could hear naught but the water and the wind. It couldn't be more different from that moon-filled night ages ago, watching his friends help scholars and men of the cloth onto a modest sloop. Then one day, in the aid of trying to understand it, my hunters took a ship to a fishing hamlet down the coast. My friends, my family, the woman I loved, all of them. A gauntleted hand gently closed around Gurman's shoulder. He found himself looking into Jaren's old but still sharp and empathetic eyes. They did not need to speak, did not need to rage or spit curses as if they were poison, for there was an understanding there. Each had sent generations of men and women off to their doom on a seemingly futile effort and felt damned for it. Gurman inclined his head. It would be as much thanks as he was willing to show with so many watching. He and Jaren were united in their goal even if their reasons were different. The Khalid witch-hunter wanted to exact justice on one who he viewed had violated her oath as a mother and queen, while Gurman was simply doing what he had been asked in the name of his freedom. "Are you, Teacher Gurman, or do you simply want to save others from such a path we have walked?" The voice from his memory spoke. The woman's words were heavily accented but with ephemeral warmth. "Blood and blades have served us well, but maybe we must find a different way once we put down our weapons. Lest we all end up corpses that aren't left to sleep in death. I feel, a corpse should be left well alone." Those had been her last words to him, echoing into that moonlit night as the schooner had vanished over the horizon. And centuries later he still did not know what they meant, yet still they remained with him. A foul scent on the air broke him from his reverie and caused him to look over his shoulder. He scanned the horizon before eventually spotting his prey, eventually spotting the four figures as pinpricks on a distant cliff, watching them. Gurman smirked. "Stupid children," he exclaimed in wry amusement. "They won't come near us after you drove them off, licking their wounds." Jaren posited, the only tell of his hatred of the daughter of Rod being the tensing of his hands. "Carrion corvids then, and it's bruised pride that stays their hand. They don't wish for me to fill their guts with quicksilver again." Gurman replied before finally walking up the gangplank onto the ship. As their host loosened the sails and the lion's pride slinked from the shallows into the sea, Gurman standing at the prow, his perpetual glower providing an amusing figurehead for the old ship. If there was one thing that this entire debacle had taught him, it was this. He did not know what he hoped to do with his freedom, but whatever it was he did not want to wait for it. Because, he finally knew why he was so bad at waiting. It left him alone with his thoughts. So for the first time in ages, he did not suffer in silence. With the wind in his hair and with people at his back, Gurman the first hunter felt his vocal cords warm. He remembered something that Maria had once hummed in his presence, a Thumerian hymn. En cuiven leet en gra. Cra croy en gra. Nil la noise ach cial na h oish. Tame seerai I engra. His voice was soft, quiet, but it carried over the sea, and though he was ignorant of the word's meaning, he could hope to understand why he felt a deep melancholy from them. Linain la small. Linain la small. Lig lays agus be leet. Lig lays agus be gra. He hoped that whoever the fool that was bewitched by the moon, need never know such profound sadness in days yet to come. 0.0.0.0. Diminutive though it was, it felt sublime to have a physical form again after so many years imprisoned under the font of her own power. Indeed, Marika felt the telltale haughty smugness of queenship tinge her movements, about to speak of the pleasantness of the day. She banished the thought after her initial euphoria wore off in recognition of her position, because despite the goddess finally being housed in a body that may as well have been tailored for her and by her, it was perilous. It was not by her own will that she had seized control of Melina, but when Rani's sorcery had snagged her linked consciousness from the heart of the Erd tree, she had not resisted its pull. In layman's terms, she had just survived a spiritual shipwreck and walked out of it with the grace of a ballet lead. It did not change the fact that she found herself in the center of the lion's den in the body of a child, staring down a group of people whose eyes were growing increasingly murderous with each passing moment. Naruto's eyes stared into hers and she watched as they began to shift colors, his face like stone. Their deep blue, turned frigid by his countenance, bled to a sanguine red as his pupils contracted to slits to give him a fierce disposition fitting of the tile she knew him as. Surprise registered in her lone golden eye when the blonde's orbs shifted to match it, the slit pupil visibly splitting into a cross shape and sending a wall of power washing over her. Small stars seemed to swirl in those determined orbs but with a note of restraint, as if it was taking effort to hold back true menace. It felt as if she was stood at the foot of a colossal dam, a safety in knowing there was a small mountain in your way that did not diminish the reality that if such power were to crash down on her. Calm yourself, you are a queen, the queen. Address them with the decorum they deserve and we shan't come to blows. She thought, assuring herself before looking over the assembled group on the balcony. She addressed their host first, whose narrow features were caught between a trio of horror, confusion and anger, her hand trembling on her catalyst. Renola, I thank thee for giving this body succor and using thy beauty to calm the beast. She said with a curt nod that must have looked ridiculous given her tiny stature. Blade, ever determined to your charge even though you were released from such expectations. Your dogged loyalty does you credit. I dare say that Malekith may have some competition. Marika saw the tall shadow flinch at the mention of the borderline mythical beast clergyman. Perhaps his stolen destined death imparted a curse of malignancy on all who heard his name. Her eye briefly settled on Kaiman sheathed at Naruto's back, perhaps there was a resonance there. Marika, Rani uttered, her visage a funhouse mirror duplicate of the one she was borrowing from Melina. The Dark Moon Princess of Caria kept her tone level but her bright blue eye gleamed with intelligence, trying to work a million different scenarios at once. So I was right, causality hath conspired to bring others with links to those not here to the blonde's presence. So frigid, daughter, Rani flinched at the word, is that any way to greet the returned voice of your mother and Queen Eternal? Though truthfully it is you that deserves the praise for conjuring something so effective in such a short time. I am your daughter no longer. Not a jot of Empyrean flesh remains, I am free from you and anything else the fingers had planned for me. Rani rebuked, baring her teeth. Renola sniffed in wry derision, ah, but you cannot take back what passed in the halls of my house as my daughter, step or otherwise. Truly, you called the Altus Plateau home longer than you did Liurnia. Enough. Naruto's right hand slowly closed into a fist, knuckles flushing white before golden wisps of fiery energy began to waft from between his clenched fingers, humming with golden power. A small breeze began to radiate from his body, rustling the clothes of all present as he spoke. You turn up out of the blue, possess my daughter and then start antagonizing my fiancée and her daughter and friend. Queen or goddess, it doesn't change the fact that right now that is a very dangerous place to stand. He extended a finger of his right hand, now positively burning with auric power, and Marika sensed that a crack was forming in that metaphorical dam. A bead of sweat rolled down the back of Marika's neck and with it came an echo of humility or perhaps vulnerability. Come now, let us be reasonable about this. Marika raised Melina's arms. I mean you no harm. This was the only way I could think to communicate with thee. Indeed, it is a feat I'll not be able to repeat for some time. Naruto blew out an angry breath. Talk, and then let her go. Be quick about it, or I'll rip you out of her. If only that were possible, Elden beast. I am she is me. Brows knitting into a line, Naruto let out a confused, the light from his hand dimming at the cryptic words. Seeing her opening, Marika capitalized, regaining some measure of composure in the face of the very real threat that if she said the wrong thing then this Elden beast would rip her to shreds. My soul is not here to be ripped out of her, merely my mind that hath temporarily swapped places with my true body pinned at the heart of the Erd tree. A local I would be thankful if you kept far away from, beast. Click, the sound of a set of teeth snapping together. Marika blinked, searching from the source of the noise as Naruto's power ebbed away, eventually landing on Renola whose face had finally settled on an emotion. All of a sudden the Carrion Queen advanced on the possessed Melina, face like thunder and teeth gnashing together. Lack of depth perception proved to be her undoing as it seemed that the exceedingly tall mother was before her sooner than she could speak. Panic, she tried to backpedal away from Radagon's ex-wife, creamy pale skin twisted by scorn, only to find she could not move, a pair of blue magical shackles having manifested from the flagstone at her feet and rooting her to the spot. Wah-unf. Marika could only let out an indignant squeal as Renola's hand descended from on high and grabbed her by the scruff of the neck and effortlessly lifted her into the air. She held her up in front of her and glared into the little girl's lone eye before speaking through gritted teeth. I can only take so many slights without acting, Marika. And thy form finally matches the selfish child I have long thought thee. But hearken, you will call mine betrothed by his name. He is no one's beast, not yours or the will's. She spat angrily before sitting on the couch and draping the incumbent goddess over her knee. Now take a punishment fitting and long overdue, she finished, raising one hand. Marika's borrowed eye bugged from its orbit. Cease, Rennala, you wouldn't dare. She did. Thwap. Ow. Marika squeaked as a sharp pain impacted her borrowed rear. She craned her head around to look at the older woman and confirm the reality that her dignity would not let her parse. How dare the... Thwap. Eek. Marika bleated as the sharp pain return followed, joining the sting of the first. Ignominious little sorceress. Thwap, thwap, thwap. Ah, ow, UGNNGH. She looked towards the veritable peanut gallery watching the display and saw that they were equally if not more gobsmacked by the show than her. Naruto was slack-jawed, eyes having returned to their normal blue and numbly trying to form into words that had abandoned him, unsure of if he should intervene or let whatever this was she would not acknowledge it, or let it run its course. Rani looked equally shocked, using a pair of her hands to cover her mouth, but judging from the tremor in her secondary hands the little blue and white imp was also enjoying the sight. Blade looked between the pair while Radagon's red wolf just wagged its tail, enjoying her plight. Loathed as she was to admit it, Marika was being spanked over the knee like a naughty girl. What have I done to deserve such indignity? Marika bridled only for Rennala's hand to swing down anew. Her strikes were swift and to the point, delivered with an open palm. There's the jokester reputed from youth. I can't say I enjoy it coming out of my child's mouth, Rennala jibed, her punishment unrelenting. Thy sheer audacity to ask such proves you are still a goddess. But there is no power to bring to bear here, is there? After all, it is just thy ego in Melina's place, is it not? Marika gritted her teeth. That wasn't exactly the truth, but her spanking was currently taking up all of her mental capacity. Not getting an answer, the blue-eyed ravenet continued to talk between each slap. You made war with my people, threw your own children into a sewer, banished Godfrey, had Godric abused and put him on the path to the wretch he became, stole my husband. He was my brother self and I his goddess and queen eternal, 'twas my right. Marika interjected petulantly. Thwap, thwap, thwap. AWGH. Her boldness swelling at being able to get long-held thoughts off her chest, Rennala continued to read Marika the riot act with the staccato beat of her palm upon Marika's borrowed rump, providing a demeaning soundtrack for the once monarch of the lands. You summoned my children away, claimed them for your own and prevented me from seeing them. Shattered the Elden ring, and now, she sheathed, now that I'm just starting to get my life back on track, you possess my daughter, insult my betrothed and can't be bothered to say his name in my house. You have more reason than stars in the sky for you to suffer indignity, and I am the only one who can give it. So heed my words, Marika, neophyte ephemeral, she stated, seeming to relish the fact that the title stung Marika's pride. Rennala straightened and reared back her hand to the apex of its arc, her hair flicking around her face. I am going to spank you until I am satisfied, and then you are going to explain your presence with nothing held back or obfuscated by half-truths. Am I understood? Marika scowled with as much animosity as Melina's cherubic face could manifest, which is to say, less than a plank length. However, she did not refute the other queen's words, perhaps due to her pride but also because in some way she was accepting that she did need to face some kind of rebuke for what she had done. And while she did not think all of her actions were wrong. If there is any woman in the lands between who I wronged, it is her. I will only permit her to take her pound of flesh in retribution, no one else. Taking her silence for agreement, Rennala began the punishment anew, and Marika did her best to endure it with dignity save the odd sporadic grunt or meep of displeasure. While it was still deeply mortifying, Marika realized that the Pale Moon Monarch was professional and fair about it, as oxymoronic as such a thing was juxtaposed to what was happening to her. The strikes stung but were delivered unerringly and without sadism, none harder or softer than the other. Had the situation been reversed, she was not sure she would have been so merciful. She also observed the others going about their business, trying their best to address the wild scenario with as much tact as it deserved. Blade had been the first to bow out, excusing himself by saying that he had to go put away his and Naruto's prior sparring equipment, while Rani had plopped herself down on one of the couches to watch the proceedings with just a twinkle of mirth radiating from her otherwise perfectly schooled features. Naruto was the most interesting to watch as he stayed standing, shifting his weight from foot to foot and looking like he was about to ask Rennala to stop at any moment, sparing Marika in Melina's form several empathetic looks. Simply worried about Melina's body, no doubt. He surely does not care for my well-being, surely. She wondered. He was a curious beast, no. He was a curious man, because while the hallmarks of wrath hid under the surface, Marika was surprised that he seemed to be a genuinely good man. An almost foreign concept to one that had dealt with backstabbers for millennia, but strangely refreshing. Her astonishment grew when, after Renola had finally finished sufficiently tanning her borrowed hide, that Naruto sauntered over and rested a hand over the recently abused flesh, a green mist of pleasantly cool energy permeating her form and taking the edge off the stinging in an instant. "Better?" he asked with the ghost of a smile as Marika let out a sigh. Renola huffed at her betrothed's actions. "The punishment won't stick if you are so quick to dampen its lingering reminders," she admonished, but there was affection in her words, as if she were chiding something she found cute despite her better judgment. Naruto simply flashed his fiancée a beatific grin as Marika got to her feet, rubbing her sore but much better feeling borrowed rear. "My thanks to thee, Naruto, consort of Karya," she said with as much grandeur as she could muster before stepping towards the couch and sitting down. "Now, as promised, I shall begin." And so she did. Naruto, Renola and Rani listened with rapt attention as the transmigrated Queen Eternal laid bare her intentions. How after her ascension and the banishment of her omen children to the sewers beneath Lindal she had seen the greater will for what it was. An unfeeling, vain and petty god that did not understand its patrons or the world it held dominion over, simply wishing to banish imperfection from its heinous grand design. Selfish as it was, scorned as I was, I decided that the will was ill fit to rule the lands between. So I rebelled, Marika explained. "Your children, why would you ever do something so vile?" Naruto asked, appalled. Marika looked up into the sky so she did not have to meet his judging gaze. "I was different back then. While not as ardent a follower of the will as my brother Self-Radagon, I did believe in the patronage and the boons its plan afforded. But my children, Morgoth and Moj, they may have been misshapen and omen tainted. But they were mine, and the will made me throw them away." "Why didn't you get them back? You're a goddess, ain't ya?" Naruto questioned. Marika looked down at Melina's little feet. The Golden Order had eyes and ears everywhere, and I had so many things to lay down for the plan that by the time my firstborn was able to find his kin, they were changed. Her words were clipped but held genuine remorse, drawing a nod from Naruto, seeming to sense her percolating self-loathing that most of the time she ignored. She went on to explain how her plan involved the banishment of her husband Godfrey and his kin, stripping grace from them in the hope that the banishment of these newly created tarnished would eventually result in an army unaffected by the greater will and strong enough to return and drive its taint from the lands between for good. She had summoned Radagon to her side, married him and lain with him, hoping that centuries in her presence would bring him around to her way of thinking, that the joy of children could see that she deserved to be the sole goddess of the land, not an idiotic and unfeeling will. And then everything went to shit. The night of black knives. Godwin. Her grief. The shattering. By the time she had come down off of her grief and anger-induced act of metaphysical destruction, the greater will had acted against her, using Radagon as an anchor to hold her in place long enough that she was bound at the heart of the Erd Tree, her own titanic power and that of the Elden Ring twisted into a prison where she could do nothing as her lands fell apart and her children fell to fates worse than death. Silence reigned for a time after that, all those that lived through the shattering somber while Naruto paid close attention. She could not fault him for neither empathy nor a desire to understand. "Melina, what is she?" he asked eventually. Melina's possessed hands touched one another, index finger to thumb. "She's an offshoot, I suppose is the best way to put it. When I sensed that the will was finally tired of the hordes of tarnished throwing themselves at the Erd Tree and beckoned you from whatever world you hail from, I knew that I had to somehow stop you. So I sectioned off a small part of my existence and utilized the power of the Elden Ring and the Erd Tree to give it life. She just ended up being far smaller than I intended, so small that I couldn't fit any of my consciousness inside, so Melina simply came to exist to fill the void. She is, for lack of a better term, my daughter." Renola squared her shoulders, but Naruto, surprised both by chuckling, "Hee, of course that little munchkin was made by a goddess, wouldn't have expected anything less. How else could she be so cute?" Marika felt her cheeks warm at the indirect compliment he had given to her craftsmanship and was silently thankful when Rani coughed to gain their attention. "You rode my cantrip to swap places with her mind, meaning there must have been an active connection there. How much have you seen or are able to influence my sister?" Rani asked, the last word a little stilted, coming to terms with the new minutiae of layers that constituted her and Melina's biological relationship. Honestly, this family tree was quickly morphing into a family tesseract. I can see through her eyes and hear through her ears, but it is an active effort to push my consciousness into her mind to listen. I don't see everything. The connection is one way when she is awake, I can only speak to her when she dreams. Marika answered truthfully, seeing no reason to lie. A beat passed while they digested this new information and took comfort in knowing that the magenta-haired girl's mind was her own. An unintentional cantrip-induced mind switch won't last all that long, even in exceptional circumstances. Rani observed, Rennala nodding gravely. So, you aren't going to be here for long. Naruto interpreted the witch's words succinctly. Marika nodded slowly, the reality of the situation a forlorn conclusion. It shan't be long before the Elden ring that serves as my prison reacts to my absence and drags me back. The presence of thy runes has likely stabilized the process, but I have a few hours at best. Naruto stroked his chin in thought, working the problem in his head. Will you be able to do this again? Once more did the errant Queen Eternal shake her head. I sincerely doubt it. The ring will adapt to the spell and make sure I cannot escape in such a way again. I will still be able to talk to Melina in her dreams, but beyond that I cannot say. Naruto closed his eyes before turning serious and asking, what does the Greater will want with me? He asked, determined to finally get an answer. Marika was all too happy to provide what little she could surmise. To change the rules of this world, the Greater will need someone to claim the Elden ring. To do that they need to be of sufficient strength to be able to breach the Erd tree and rip it from my body, so it summoned you, hoping that you would find your way to the tree and through you be able to somehow reorder this cosmos into something profaned, without free will. Yeah, that's never going to happen. No offense, but your big gilded shrub is kind of an eyesore, so I don't think you'll be going near it any time soon. Naruto replied, full of mirth, but his eyes shifted to something more sincere. He approached Marika and dropped to one knee, tapping her forehead. You've done a lot of things that you need to atone for, so maybe one day you will get out of that tree, and if you do, don't be the same queen you were before. Be better. He rose then, picking up his discarded jacket, and found Rani by his side, taking his hand. The pair left the balcony, leaving just Marika and Rennala alone with the Red Wolf. Rennala, it seemed, was going to watch her until the spell broke. You know, Rennala said, breaking the silence, I think this is the first time you and I have ever been alone together. Before Radagon left to go to your side, I had only ever seen you with a royal cortege at your side. Truly? Marika asked, failing to recall a time where she had ever been truly alone with the Carrion Queen. I think I can remember at least one instance. When Radagon and Godfrey went hunting in Limgrave together. Rennala slowly hugged herself at the memory, her smile melancholic of times long past. Unbidden, words poured from Marika's lips before she could stop them. I miss Godfrey. Radagon will always be my other half, but there was something special about Godfrey. Banishing him from the capital is one of the few things I regret. I don't even know if he's still alive. Rennala leaned forwards in her seat, her face betwixt with sardonic humor. If he is anything like my Naruto, then he yet lives, Marika. It seems we both fell into the trap of falling for men too stubborn to die. Laughter percolated between them, and Marika wondered again if their positions had been switched, if she would have found herself laying with the blonde. A beautiful image, if a hope she could never obtain in this life. Hope. What is it you hope to achieve, Rennala? She asked the raven-haired sorceress, who raised a thin eyebrow at the question. It's rare, even rarer these days, that I can speak with another monarch, so tell me, for all your power, what do you hope for in the future? Marika knew that she and Rennala could never be friends at this point. Too much had passed between them for that. She had stolen her husband and Rani had murdered her beloved son. But still, they could speak as one queen to another. Humming in thought, Rennala eventually responded, I would see my family return to me, those that yet live, that we might sit around a table as kin. I would have my adopted children know that they are loved forever and always, and that the door was always open for more of them. I would join in union with my betrothed, have him sit by my side so that I might bask in his serenity as I cool his temper. That is what the woman in me hopes. And the queen in you? Marika asked, her countenance something only a monarch could understand. For to be a queen you must have a realm, that which you ruled over and provided for. Her companion looked out over the walls of the academy towards the distant tower of her apartments. With all the renovations that Naruto, Boggart and Moongram had done to it, had regained much of its splendor. The queen in me wants a king and a kingdom. You intend your consort as more than a husband. Marika was surprised by this. The lands between are broken, both as a land and in their sense. As much as part of me still despises the theocratic dirge you reigned in over them, the realm was for a time as one. Raya Lucaria is a bastion for those who require a home and succor in a world that has forgotten what those words mean. So why not open the doors of a school to those that need to relearn what it is to be kind? Grudges forgotten, scars healed, the kingdom of Caria reborn. Heavy will be your head that wears the crown, Marika pointed out. Renala smiled, looking at Naruto walking with Rani far below, a weight I need not bear alone. 0.0.0.0. For many eons now, blackness was all Radagon had known. The absence of light and color, both metaphorical and literal, was a reality trapped within the Erd tree, bound as he was just as much a penitent as his heretic of a sister self. True servant of the Golden Order he may be, but trapped even within Marika's own body he had not even been afforded the luxury of physical form for ages. Though unlike Marika he would not gripe about it. So it was with supreme surprise that the red-headed warrior had witnessed color in this drab and dreary place. First there had been a familiar blue light that seemed to seep up from his memories, melancholy coiling in his heart at feeling the cool gossamer tendrils on Marika's body, but he had been surprised when Marika's daily bickering had stalled and guttered before being yanked away. Before he could begin to voice his shock at the profane miracle, Radagon had felt their shared body begin to shift and mold from Marika's womanly form to that of his own. Where once the Queen Eternal had been crucified to the pillory of her own power was a tall and broad man with long red hair that trailed down his scarred bare chest. Hanging there, he reflected that Marika deserved a grim level of admiration for being able to endure this position for centuries with nary a wince. But where was she? Her mind did not respond to his probes even if the connection was still there. My lord, Marika has escaped. He spoke, voice echoing out into the darkness. Please, you must act before she does greater heresies. He pleaded, hoping that the greater will would grace him with an answer, or at least acknowledge his presence. No reply came, nor any feeling of the will's perfectly ordered majesty. It was simply him left hanging alone in the void, unanswered. Alone. Pursing his lips, Radagon screwed his eyes shut and did his best to ignore the feelings that burned in his heart. He was a penitent here as well, cast into this prison for the crimes of his sister self and doomed to never again feel any form of anything. He had endured such thoughts for generations. Full epochs of the shattering had come and gone, and Radagon had simply maintained his scorn of Marika and vigil to make sure she never escaped. And now, in that failure he was met with nothing from his beloved god that did not even care enough for him to observe his very failure. That stung. His head hung limp against his chest, closing his eyes and words passing from his lips in the meanest ghost of a whisper. Lord, why have you forsaken me? Because it didn't care. It didn't care that he had been its greatest champion, that he had brought the light of the Erd tree to the lands between and born not one, not two but 3 Empyrean to inherit its lineage should Marika fail. It had made him do things that were monstrous, and he had done them without a second thought, despite his heavy heart. But what sense there was there to defy the greater will? It was the one and true God that had a plan, they all existed to serve it. Even if he did find its design. Who forsook you? Asked a childish feminine voice in front of him. Golden eyes snapped open and Radagon's head whipped up with a snap. Startled at the sudden intrusion, a foreign voice in the first he had heard besides Marika's in centuries. It was an entirely uncalled for and unbecoming act for one who had mastered himself, but entirely irresistible. God or no, the minds of men were social things, and starved of social interaction for centuries he acted to meet the newcomer. At last a new color breached the darkness at the heart of the Erd tree. Magenta. Radagon's surprised face twisted into a confused frown. Perhaps due to this being the first time in a while he had physical synapses to fire, but before him was a little girl he could not place. She sat on the air before him, her body translucent like a phantom but definitely there. Hi, she greeted him animatedly, waving a hand. I'm Melina. Do you know where Mama is? His mind rebooted at that, realizing that to which he spoke, and felt a weight lift off him. Ah, Marika's offshoot, he stated to himself. The truth of Marika's vanishing suddenly snapping into position. Rani, he groaned forlornly, concluding that his daughter's magic was at work here. It did add a measure of comfort though that the ring would soon act to drag Marika back to her prison. He did not like how hollow the feeling felt though, and instead decided to pass the time by speaking with his sister self's heretical spawn. Thy sire has been drawn away and thou hath filled the gap. It shan't last long, I ask you leave me to my penance. Melina pouted before shaking her head. Nah, you look sad and Papa always says to help sad people be happy. Radagon blinked owlishly. This child was the epitome of everything he should despise. He should hate her as a magically created thing by his heretic sister, made to pervert his lord's plan, and she is completely and utterly innocent, he thought, the darkness fading from his eyes. I see, then I thank thee for thy company, Melina. I am thy uncle. he said awkwardly, clearly unused to such niceties. Melina beamed at that and began to chatter animatedly about her growing family, causing Radagon to smile fondly when she spoke of Rennala. Lords, how his heart ached for his ex-wife, but that bridge was long burned and he was simply joyful that she had found happiness in the arms of another. Happiness and safety that his absent god would seek to despoil. In the time that he and his odd relation conversed, Radagon of the Golden Order was in two minds, the first being wistful whimsy at this truly innocent child for the few hours they were together, and the latter food for thought. If my God has truly forsaken me, and it would see that which I found abhorrent made manifest and despoil that which I would keep safe. Then maybe it is past time I think for myself. 0.0.0.0. The weather remained fair in Liurnia for the rest of the day. High overhead, the sky remained an unbroken band of blue that served to thin the mist that clung to the province's namesake lakes, and the sun provided a pleasant warmth that the mist diffused an air of freshness into. The mist seemed to thin in one place in particular, a gap in a copse of trees that admitted passage from the lakes into the forests that ringed them. A peculiar sound approached from the opening, the sound akin to many dozens of hard taps in an irregular yet strangely methodical beat that put one in mind of some great insect on its approach, limbs scuttling as it made its way. It was a correct description of the wrong animal. Naruto entered the forest atop the back of his tamed giant lake crustacean, lightly tapping the reins to send the creature marching along the wooded track with little complaint, its beady eyes on small stalks curiously surveying a locale it would usually avoid. Okay, Krabby, that's good, let's get to high ground and maybe we can see about getting us all something to eat. Naruto complimented the large crustacean, patting its armored head as one might their steed, drawing an affectionate churning of its mandibles. Ranni tutted, seated as she was in front of Naruto with his arms around her waist to make sure she didn't fall. "'Tease not a crab, your crustacean steed is a giant Liurnian crayfish, hath thou never had seafood before?" she questioned haughtily, the tip of her pointed hat tapping Naruto's chin with each of the crayfish's movements. "Sure I have, I just call him Krabby cause he tried to attack me when we first met. Boggart makes great seafood," Naruto defended himself, reassuring Krabby when the odd steed let out an annoyed grunt. The iron-masked blackguard leaned his head over Naruto's shoulder to look at Ranni, his voice mediating between the two. "Seafood is all about prep time. But begging your pardon, princess, might I make a correction?" he asked. Boggart could be surprisingly tactful when it came to royalty. "Thou may. As the channel to the sea has been severed for a very long time, technically the crayfish are simply shellfish rather than seafood," the de facto cook of Raya Lucaria informed her. Naruto smirked as Ranni sputtered, pulling the rim of her hat down to hide her face. "Ah, yes, I see. Thank you, noble blackguard, your counsel on culinary matters is laudable," Ranni squeaked, unwilling to admit that there were gaps in her knowledge. Naruto could practically feel Boggart's hidden smile. After Naruto and Ranni had beat a hasty retreat from Rennala and the possessed Melina, the blue-skinned daughter had decided that it was best if she and Naruto made themselves scarce from the academy for a few hours, reasoning that the presence of his runes may drag out how long it would take her cantrip to break down and swap the minds back to their correct places. Seeing the logic if not the mechanics of the sorcerer, Naruto had agreed and roped Boggart into some hunting. Ergo they had ridden out across the lakes on his tamed crayfish, Krabby, and now sought some game to hunt. He smiled looking down at Ranni. She seemed wrapped with the surroundings of her homeland, probably so used to either her tower or teleporting everywhere that she's forgotten where she grew up, he thought. Kurama opened a large red eye at the back of his mind, the fox's maw curling in a curious smirk. "Has it ever occurred to you that people who teleport a lot must have an awful sense of direction? Never physically going anywhere, just popping there and back." It was an interesting thought experiment, one he would like to put to the test and hopefully bond with the little girl who would one day be his stepdaughter. Reaching a clearing, the trio disembarked and Naruto hitched Krabby to a tree, feeding the great crustacean a fist-sized chunk of pork. Behind him Boggart had already begun assembling a fire pit, their dedicated cook here as any other time. "What art thou hunting today, father?" Ranni asked, amused that the word still made Naruto sputter and swoon, but her eye widened when he mixed her with a grin. "We are hunting deer," Naruto said, "unless it's beyond you." Ranni fumed, shaking a fist at him cutely. "Jackanape. I am Ranni the witch, my spells are more than enough for some antlered venison." Her voice cooled and she blushed in embarrassment, wherever they might be. He held her gaze for 5 whole seconds before she could no longer bear it, rushing over to him and using her forearms to clamber up onto his shoulders, whereupon he set off, hopping up into the treetops above in search of the elusive game. Half an hour later and they had scented a deer, a buck going by the scrapes of antlers against the bark of trees that Naruto pointed out while he explained the bits and pieces of hunting he had picked up during the training trip with Jiraiya. What an unscrupulous man, Rani exclaimed quietly, condemning the late godfather after a tale of when he had borrowed Naruto's wallet to ply information from a small town courtesan, leaving Naruto to have to hunt for them for the night. Oh, he could be an asshole at times, but sometimes I think loving someone means being able to forgive small antics here and there. Naruto said, coming to a stop and falling to one knee as he spotted the deer. It was a large male, its large black eyes sweeping the surroundings, oblivious to the two in the trees 50 meters away. Rani looked at the deer and felt her anticipation rise. Father, she began, her cheeks dusting pink in embarrassment. I appreciate thou allowing me to ride upon thy shoulders given my childish form's lack of mobility, but I now lack the range to land my spells. Naruto looked at her curiously. That's a lie, he thought, then again perhaps she was worried about another misfire given her cantrip's knock-on effect. It was still unfathomably cute. So what would you like me to do about it? He whispered back. Rani gained an impish amusement, jutting her chin in the direction of the deer. Get closer to the deer, my spiky-haired steed. Naruto leapt forwards, silently leaping from tree branch to tree branch, the only sound or evidence of his movement being the few stray pine needles his foot dislodged with each silent leap. Note that one, the other one, she instructed, indicating a particular branch that he hopped to. And no, closer still. He moved 2 branches forwards. They were barely 10 meters from the deer now, but still Rani was not satisfied. She facepalmed before sighing sharply. Thou knowest what? Just throw me at them. As far and hard as thou can. The blonde gave her a disbelieving look, lifting her off his shoulder and holding her in front of his face akin to a large kitten. Is she serious? She read his silent comment and nodded imperiously, crossing one set of her arms while her other conjured a spectral bow and arrow. Yes, I'll be fine, just do it. Gulping lightly, Naruto reared his arm back and threw the white and blue missile in the direction of the deer, biting his tongue not to burst out laughing as Rani let out a strangled war cry. But to his surprise the little witch came through, loosing a glintstone arrow from her magical construct that nailed the deer dead on, puncturing the hide and breastplate before piercing the heart. It did not suffer, letting out a surprised bleat before crumpling to the ground, dead. Rani hastily conjured a series of magical circles that she passed through in sequence, each one gently siphoning off more kinetic energy before she alighted on the forest floor with a hop, panting but beaming back at Naruto, preening at his proud nod. He carried the deer carcass over one shoulder and Rani on the other as he returned to the camp, but as they walked both of their faces thinned to dire lines. You feel them too? Naruto asked, him and Rani sitting around the campfire while Boggart skinned and gutted the deer. Nodding at the question, Rani looked in the direction of the woods and waited. There was someone out there, slowly approaching and watching them, caution deep in their passive emotions that Naruto could sense. I sense a concealment sorcery, powerful, but has its hallmarks. Then we wait till they come to dinner. Naruto said nonchalantly, his returned jacket concealing his muscles coiling imperceptibly. Boggart let out a yelp and brandished his boning knife when a figure appeared from blue and gold mist at the borders of the camp, frightened at the sudden appearance of such an imposing figure. It was a knight, mounted atop a horse in an imposing set of armor forged from a combination of brushed silver with unalloyed gold details at the gorget, joints and gauntlets. Each of their muscled legs was sheathed in a pair of angular greaves and sabatons that met the knee in a chevron-shaped guard, elements of blue underlayers visible between the plates of metal. What drew the eye most was their helmet, a fully enclosed silver sallet with artisanal engravings over its surface, affixed with a wide horizontal plume made of unalloyed gold that depicted a thin but fibrous tree. Each arm bore a weapon that was as striking as the armor the knight and horse wore. A teardrop-shaped mirror shield with the mysterious gold at its end was affixed to the left vambrace while a tall halberd was clutched in the cestus of their right hand. It was forged from the purest silver and was ribbed along the midsection for grip, a necessity rather than a choice given that the thing was longer than the horse the knight rode upon was tall, its blade a hooked blade while its butt was chevron-shaped with a blue-green crystal in the empty space, glintstone, Naruto realized. The knight did not move, watching the trio and one crawfish intently before finally speaking in a rich feminine voice, revealing the knight as a woman. Hail, travelers of the lakes. Might I join you by the fire for food? I have come a long way, she said. Loretta, Rani said, causing the knight's head to snap to look at the diminutive little girl, sharply inhaling in recognition. I know that voice, but that's not Princess Rani, Loretta questioned before dismounting from her horse with a thud. Stowing her war sickle on her horse, the knight raised her hands to her helm and unlatched it, a cascade of ashen hair tumbling about her shoulders when she pulled it free. It was only then that Naruto realized just how exceptionally big Loretta was. The plates of her armor were visibly thick and her tall and broad stature put her a head taller than even Renola. She must be nearing 7 feet tall. She had a pretty face, pale skin and long ashen hair that tumbled messily down her back. "You know her?" Naruto asked rhetorically, it being obvious that the two knew each other. Rani answered her companion all the same, signaling Bogart to sheath his knife. "Loretta, she was a royal knight of Caria, once. Now she bears the sigil of my half-brother Mikela." Naruto could feel the beginnings of conniption scratch the base of his mind at what was likely to be another emotional revelation or other familial drama. "Oh shit, this is my family drama now," he realized, drawing a snigger from Kurama, who always delighted in his mundane miseries, the oversized fur ball that he was. Naruto shook his head before gesturing to the fire where a spit of venison roasted. "No use talking on an empty stomach. Sit down and have something to eat, I'm sure we'll have lots to talk about." Loretta favored Naruto with a look, her nose wrinkling a little as if she did not like the way he spoke before accessing and sitting opposite them. She grabbed a stick of the rich meat and began to eat, mirroring Naruto, Rani and soon Bogart too. "I was traveling the land seeking help for the Haligtree when the Omen Margit crossed my path," Loretta explained. "He said that something impossible had happened, that Queen Renola had returned to her senses. I didn't believe it at first, but seeing the academy again." "Oh yeah, Renola's fit as a fiddle, I made sure of it," Naruto said before asking a question. "Rani said that you used to be a knight of Caria, what changed?" Chagrined at the interruption, the tall knight answered, though notably annoyed. "When Queen Renola fell to her madness, the Albanurics no longer had anyone to protect them. As one of their distant kin, I shepherded them to Haligtree and took up service under Lord Mikela to follow his cause. I still owe Caria everything, but until my debt to Lord Mikela is fulfilled I am a knight of the Haligtree." She paused, eyes drawn to the moonlight greatsword sheathed at Naruto's back. "Who, exactly are you?" Naruto grinned. "Oh, I'm Naruto, Renola's fiancé." What, how much hath I missed? .0.0.0. Note. This is the part Slifer and warned you of. Brace yourselves. "You are radiant," rattled a rasping voice with sick perversion, "more than any other. More mighty than your father, more beautiful than your mother. Unblighted like your sister but frail, so frail." A clawed ebon finger trailed over a pale, emaciated arm. "Can you not see my affections? I will take care of you, build you a kingdom, a dynasty where all are united under blood." The hand pulled away from the dark figure, the flickering light of red fire painting the speaker with an evil light, his horns shadowing the object of his affections. "No Moj, you are wrong, ill, not right in the head." A trident slammed down, tipped with crackling red lighting, its thorned prongs sticking deep into the bare stomach of the one who replied. They screamed then, a pitiful sound as fire and crimson lighting was sent streaming into their body. "I am the only sane one in this world, my Mogwin," screamed Moj, Lord of Blood, his eyes maddened and sickened with perverse glee as his victim screamed hoarsely. "Accept my love into your body and soul, Miquella, and learn to love the pain." The trident remained buried in Mikela's stomach for a whole minute before Moj finally believed the frail demigod had had enough, ripping the weapon loose and watching, fascinated as the smoking wounds slowly closed themselves, but not fast enough to stop him from poking a finger into one of the round lacerations that still smoked with bloody curse. Mikel groaned, too exhausted to fully express his pain, so Moj removed the finger, lifting the blooded digit to his fanged mouth and tasting the sweet nectar that his consort's blood was. "I thank you for your gift of life, my love," Moj crooned revoltingly before disappearing into a pool of blood. "I shall return again, with a gift worthy of your affections." The Omen son of Marika and Godfrey emerged from a pool of blood but was surprised to find that he was not astride the Siofra River but rather nowhere at all. A black void peeled out in all directions, his only frame of reference being the floor of blood he stood upon. Moj smiled, a genuine and sincere smile rendered monstrous by his calamity of a face. "You call me, my lady?" He spoke into the void, sinking to one knee and lowering his head. "I do, my loyal child, he who understands that pain is what links all as one." Drops of blood began to rise from the lake of red, drawing together into an undulating sphere of dully glowing liquid that slowly but surely became akin to Moj in size. The heart of the blood began to darken from red to black while the perimeter of the anomaly glowed brighter, seeming to shift from liquid to a fiery glowing miasma. The darkness too began to morph, an absence of form only evidenced by the barrier where color ended and darkness began to extrude itself from a blob and began to take on a roughly humanoid shape. With time it became more shapely, like the silhouette of a buxom woman. The phantom hugged itself before a pair of horns gorily split from its head in gouts of black ichor, followed by 2 sets of wings from its back, one leathery, one feathered. The formless mother had come. Moj smiled magnanimous at his patron, clanking the butt of his spear against the floor in salute. "How may I help you then? What needs to bleed, what needs to hurt?" The formless mother hummed at her servant, tracing a taloned finger over his chin and drawing a loan of scars there. They froze over and boiled all the same time. "Something new has come to the lands between, something old and smelling of blood. Not our blood, but it has roused my interest, and what I have seen I find most interesting. An apostate of your greatness, another who has seen that this world needs dyeing red." Moj proclaimed, "I shall seek them out at once, my lady." The formless mother's hand slashed out, jamming a thumb into where his thicket of horns crawled from an eye socket. He hissed in pain. "You shall not. This one bears the stink of another outer god, as well as the horrid normality of the will. No, there is another in this land that I want." Moj huffed, cupping his face when the aspect of the goddess retracted her thumb, taking a chunk of his horn with it. "Name them, and it shall be done," he proclaimed, the pain not diminishing his fervor. The silhouette cocked its head in amusement, pleased. "The will, it has called another Elden beast to the lands, but this one is a man. And he knows pain, oh how he knows pain. Oh how I must have him, I must pour my ichor into his mouth and proclaim him my child." Moj watched as an image took form in the lake of blood, the image of a young man with blonde spiky hair and beautiful blue eyes. He looked kind, but there was a power there that made Moj quiver in excitement. "It shall be done, my lady. See that you do, though watch and be ready. For to make this one bleed you must learn where to strike." And Moj. The omen watched as the blood that constituted the mother's form began to pull inwards on itself, her voice growing fainter as it shrank to a single point of light and shadow. "Succeed, and you shall be rewarded graciously." An object dropped into the blood before him as the mother faded completely. Looking down at the tiny thing, Moj dipped his hand into the lake and cupped it in his palm, lifting it into his hand to inspect it with his one good eye. It was a band of smoky obsidian with a star-shaped red gem set into it and glowing with malevolent light. His shoulders shook, begging to laugh before guffering in peals of raucous, maddened laughter. For he knew what this was, a ring of betrothal. "Oh Miquela, how blind I must have been, you must be too lonely to return my affections, so our dear formless mother offers a soon-to-be son as your companion for the birth of our dynasty." Aben wings burst from Moj's shoulders, beating mightily as his laughter and sick, depraved joy echoed into the night. Completely unaware that the greater will was not the only stupid outer god that graced the lands between. Fate would not be so kind to him. Naruto walked through the halls of Raya Lucaria whistling a jaunty nameless tune, his hands in his pockets and gait relaxed. Mid-morning light streamed in through the passing windows, and he got the distinct impression that summer was finally on the way after a lengthy spring. The days were getting longer, the nights shorter, and there was this immutable energy to the academy that was a far cry from the run-down and melancholy place that he, Melina and Bogart had stumbled across all those months ago, the doors barred by a magical sigil that had confounded him and required him to tap into his knowledge of Fuinjutsu to get through. Knowledge that had instantly proven to be pointless as their host had just opened the bloody thing for them and let them inside. He was still a little miffed at that, but now, Naruto was more mystified and focused on the fact that it had been so long. It felt like scarcely yesterday he had stepped out of his apartment in Konoha, heard an insufferably holier-than-thou voice command his attention and been whisked off to the heartland of the lands between. Yet here he was now, over half a year later, with a litter of adopted daughters, an imposing roof over his head and a fiancé waiting in the wings. A tall, beautiful, powerful, intelligent, loving and compassionate fiancé who happened to be a god's damned queen to boot. "Please stop salivating over Renola. The air in here turns pink when you imagine cuddling against her," Kurama grumbled from the back of his mind, his voice half amused. To one who had lived a millennium, it must have seemed like even more of a whirlwind romance. Now that he thought about it, "Hey, Kurama," he asked. Kurama squinted at the representation of Naruto in the mindscape, which now took the form of a large blue velvet pillow that the fox loved to roll around in. "No." The blonde narrowed his eyes at the instant reply. "You don't even know what I was going to ask," he said, his voice echoing off the walls. Even though the room was slightly more occupied, the majority of the halls were still empty, and he could thus converse out loud without people questioning his sanity. The nine-tailed fox sat up, shaking his head. I know you, Naruto. And I can guess what you were going to ask based on your line of thought. So, no, I didn't really pay attention to your parents courting each other. The closest I ever got was tricking Kushina into sinking her fist into his gut while she was in a seven-tailed version 2 cloak. Hearing mention of his parents, Naruto's face lit up, his eyes filled with intrigue, before he pulled back. Nah, I was going to ask if you ever had any romance yourself. Kurama opened his mouth to respond but shapely closed it, opening it again only for no words to pass his peeled-back lips. He blinked once, then twice as his long ears flattened against his head in confusion before finally blurting out a flat, disbelieving. What? Well, given how old you are, there must have been someone. An adventurous shrine maiden, maybe. The blonde posited, his smile tugging at the edges of his lips, wanting to press on a rare instance of the usually unflappable Kurama's confusion. His partner gawped at him incredulously. Naruto, I'm a 125-meter tall fox that can cause natural disasters by swinging my tails too hard. What kind of human would want to take me out for a moonlit dinner? I don't know, maybe there was a boss summon animal that wanted to see if the big bad fox was secretly a big softy at heart. Which I can say you are. Keep talking, and I'll roast your internal organs. The vulpine beast shot back, putting his fingers into his ears. Or maybe Matabi. Stop. Ha 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 ha. He dropped his pretense of crying, thoroughly enjoying that he could get the seemingly implacable fox to open up on some light-hearted barbing rather than the fox's usually brusque snark. I'm joking, Kurama. Anyway, it's just reminding me that so much has happened in such a short time, and before I know it, half a year has gone by. In point of fact, 2 whole weeks had gone by since Loretta, former Carrion Knight and current servant of the Haligtree, had returned to her former haunt in Liurnia. The surprise with which she had discovered he and Rani in the forests and subsequent discovery of his status as Renala's consort and betrothed had resulted in the statuesque Nidus coming with them to the academy. After a somewhat stilted reintroduction to her queen, Loretta had chosen to take up residence in a set of apartments above the academy's gatehouse. Close enough to be held abreast of news but still far enough away to keep to herself. She's a weird one, that Loretta. Naruto thought curiously, thinking over the few times that he had interacted with her since she had come to live nearby, though the Nidus had insisted that it was only a temporary arrangement. She seems like she wants to get involved with things here but, at the same time is afraid to get involved. Every interaction is so cagey. Cagey was a perfect description for the woman as while she comported herself with the grace and politeness of a knight, she seemed to treat the separation created by her duties as a sworn blade of the Haligtree as a reason why she shouldn't get too personal with anyone at Raya Lucaria. With a few exceptions, he mentally added, stopping briefly to look out of one of the large faceted windows that ran along the side of the hallway. His gaze came to rest upon the distant squat structure of the gatehouse, its inward-facing windows shadowed by a passing cloud. Naruto was briefly overcome with the prickling sixth sense that told him he was being watched, and he could imagine for a moment that the tall knight was looking back at him from those windows before he moved off again. However, thoughts of the former Carrion Knight did not leave Naruto's mind that was assailed with a plethora of vivid and, to him at least, amusing memories to do with her. For you see, while Loretta mostly stayed away from the inner reaches of the academy, she had been bold as brass regarding certain aspects of its new regime, specifically him. He chuckled ruefully at the memories, remembering the mix of confusion and sheer indignance that had betwixt her pretty face when she had come down off her initial shoot of surprise in the forest. She had denounced the truths that he and Rani had laid down as folly and falsehoods and been on the verge of drawing her weapon on him, demanding that he hand over both Kaiman and the Moonlight Greatsword because, obviously, he must have stolen them. Naruto had not taken kindly to such a baseless accusation, his following one-fingered salute having done little more than cement it in Loretta's mind, but Rani had proven to be the level-headed one, able to convince her family's former servant that he had in fact been given both blades as a mark of his station as the Full Moon Queen's betrothed. While the words had served to add a dash of cold water to the boil that was the tall knight's mind, enough to get her to come to the academy and greet her former mistress, they had not banished the specter of former responsibility. So it was that not 2 days later, she appeared before Naruto and demanded a duel. Hear my words, Naruto Uzumaki. By some miracle, you hath earned the affections of Karia's queen, enough to be marked as the one she intends to one day wed. I denounce this as an insult and falsehood, though I know not how. By trickery in taking advantage of her scolded heart or thaumaturge bewitchment. I know what, but I can comment on the truth. Thou art a foreigner and of low birth, unworthy to hold either sword of the queen's affection. Thus I challenge you, Come dusk we shall duel upon the lakeside, and should you fail to best me in martial combat you shall renounce thy engagement and leave Liurnia, returning the swords till someone worthy of the queen appears." When Naruto had finally finished processing what she had said, he simply walked her out to the lakes, offered to take the duel then and there, and proceeded to unceremoniously beat her into the dirt. To Loretta's credit, she had taken the loss in stride and, over the past weeks, challenged him no less than 4 times, each with a differing method or time frame. He triumphed each and every time and succeeded in hammering home that he had more than enough power to be worthy of holding the twin blades he had been gifted with. Even now, he could just imagine her haughtily turning her nose up at him in silent rebuke of his existence, and he was ready to show that he did deserve to be here no matter how many so-called duels of honor it took. "All she can do is sniff and snort. She couldn't beat you in a fight even if she trained for 1,000 years, Kurama commented, having emerged from his previous embarrassment at Naruto's jokes. Shaking his head, Naruto replied, "She'll try as many times as it takes for her to feel satisfied. Plus, I'm certain she's holding back a lot if what Selen told me about the Carrion Knights is true. She should have a whole arsenal of spells at her disposal, yet she keeps sorcery to a minimum during the duels." He could respect someone who kept throwing themselves up against a seemingly impossible task yet still maintained some level of honor, even if he did think she was way too proud. However, as Naruto turned into the next section of the labyrinthine corridors did he find himself not alone. Indeed, for the first time in a long time, he was not the only person walking the halls of the academy, and the figure that stood in the center of the hall would have drawn the eye of any sane individual. Even a cursory glance revealed that it was not human, but it was certainly no animal or beast. It was shaped roughly like a man but far too thin, its chest a sloping triangular prism of obsidian and ebony with a medium-sized lump of glintstone set into its center, releasing a shimmering light. It had a set of spindly arms and legs made up of jointed metallic pipes and 7-fingered hands. The automata paid Naruto no attention as he passed it, its ellipsoid-shaped head made of brass staring impassively forward as it continued its thorough and thankless task of sweeping the floor, a broom and dustpan held in each hand. Passing 3 more of such janitorial sentinels, Naruto considered just what else he had gleaned from Loretta with every time they had crossed blades and found that while some of the restraint was born out of chivalric fair play, there was a melancholy regret in every twirl of her scythe or thrust of its wicked edge. "She feels guilty," he concluded after a moment, the sight of the automata not fazing him at all, having become used to their presence. The waves of guilt had soured every clang of metal and slowed the showers of sparks that had exploded from their crossed blades, sharp enough to be felt but vague enough to struggle to find its cause. But now that he thought about it, a conversation with old Moongram had shed some much-needed light on Loretta's mindset. Opening parenthesis ... Flashback. "The Lady Loretta has returned," Moongram asked, his wizened features full of surprise. Only centuries of service kept him from dropping his helmet in shock. He had just got back from Castle Morn and delivered news to Irina's father of her safe lodging here in Liurnia. He was barely out of his riding breeches when Naruto came to him to catch him up on what had happened since he had been away. "Yeah, and brought a damn attitude with her. Who does she think she is, claiming that I'm a bad fit for Renola?" Naruto griped. He took up a stiff pose and pointed towards himself, affecting an overly dramatic but still dead-on impression of the turncoat knight. "Woe is it for me to stand such an ignominious man to be the betrothed of such a queen." His smile dropped with his hands to his sides. "I can't figure her out. She wants to put distance between her and Renola but still sticks around like a kicked puppy, looking for a reason to defend her but unsure if she should. It's confusing." "Ah, I see." Moongram's face turned downcast, seeming to age 1,000 years in a few seconds. He quietly stowed his helmet at his side and gave Naruto a wan smile. "Sir Naruto, I know that his is a lot to ask, but please be patient with Loretta. She is probably ashamed of her change in loyalty. By your description of her armor, it sounds like she has become a knight of the Haligtree, and thus the Lord Mikela, a child sired from union between Radagon and Marika." Realization dawned on Naruto like the rising sun. "Oh, right," he mumbled, considering how that must feel for both Renola and Loretta. Abandoning the monarch you had sworn your life to, whose house you had grown up in and learned under, believing her a lost cause and swearing yourself to another that was the result of her husband forsaking her. Yes, it was indeed a lot of baggage to carry. What was he like? Moongram looked up at him, quirking a brow in curiosity. "Mikela, I mean. I know he was Marika and Radagon's second son and was associated with the Haligtree, but that's about it. Also that he was tied up with Millicent somehow." The old knight stroked his neatly maintained beard wistfully, likely recalling the world before the shattering, of a time when Rennala had merely been severely depressed and not truly mad. My interactions with him were scant, little more than cordial parlance between Caria and Marika's domains. I was more familiar with the work of his subjects in trying to hold back the rot after the shattering had been upon us, but Moongram let a beat pass before finding the right words. Pure and radiant, he wields love to shrive clean the hearts of men. It was utterly terrifying. Naruto's eyes narrowed, listening to the most loyal servant of his fiancée talk. To witness a battlefield of men driven mad by loyalty, rot, malignance and had but for a moment be transcended to a brotherhood of mankind, with naught but a touch of his internal light. He is a good soul, but in all goodness, there is the implication of terror. That personhood and grudges could be laid to waste with but a flicker of his eyes, and men and women alike driven to do what was right, when Mikela was the one with the power, if not the strength, to decide what right was. His voice fell to a whisper then, and that is nothing to speak of Mesmer. Mess who? The blonde questioned, earning a dismissive handwave. A slip of the tongue, Sir Naruto. But to the matter at hand, I am not so bold as to ask for your kindness at Lady Loretta. But please be patient, her zealotry comes from a good place. Naruto remained silent then, he had a lot to think about. Opening parenthesis ... Flashback end. Considering what he knew now and the clearer feelings that he had felt from her in their subsequent duels, a small but reasonably believable hypothesis began to take shape in Naruto's mind. Loretta was conflicted over her elegance between Rennala and Mikela, dancing as she was between glintstone and unalloyed gold. While she worked through the nuances, she wanted to keep her distance but also did not want to threaten the newfound happiness in Rennala's life. Thus she tested him, crossing blades with him to see if he was indeed going to make the full moon queen happy or if he was going to cut and run, sending Rennala back into despair. His hand closed into a fist. No way in hell am I ever letting that happen. So let her come, let her test, let her rain every test and magical trick upon me, I'll pass them all. The sky will split apart before I let these people I have found here fall into despair ever again. The darkness fell away from his thoughts as he changed tack to consider the lingering intrigue of Melania and Mikela, two people he had never met but had had so much impact on those who called the academy home. Melania, the blade of Mikela, the so-called biological mother of Millicent and the other daughters of Rot. She was, technically speaking, Melina's sister by way of Marika's parthenogenesis and was the one that had unleashed the Rot upon Kaled, rendering one of Rennala's sons a maddened invalid. Rani, Radon, Rykard, he mentally listed, some just names while others conjured strong mental images. Rani had sent out word for her agents across the land to return to the academy, and while most had sent their assent in returning, so far only e.g., the troll smith and war counselor had arrived. Radon was maddened with scarlet rot in distant Kaled, but so strong that none could fell him, while Rykard. That one troubled his mind the most. The praetor of Mount Gelmir had earned himself the name the Lord of Blasphemy for the atrocities that he and his recusants were committing across the land. Just means I'm gonna have to smack him upside the head if Rennala doesn't, he decided. But it went beyond that. There was a plethora of other issues and business that they would eventually have to attend to. The daughters of Rot that apparently hunted for Millicent, what Marika had told them of the Greater Will's machinations for them, the news that Mikela had been stolen, and even deaths, cryptic words about the afterlife being broken. Quote ... It's a fucking mess, he finally said under his breath with a sigh. He shrugged his shoulders and felt a reassuring warmth across his upper body, his mood once more tipping upwards, but at least I've finally got my jacket back. If there was one silver lining from the whole debacle with Marika assuming direct control of Melina for the day, it was that he had finally, after nearly half a year, been able to reclaim his beloved black jacket, and while it had been creased in ways only being used by a child could, it felt so wonderfully nostalgic to be able to wear it over the clothes that he had acquired and been given since coming to the lands between. He had nearly lost it when Melina had unleashed her puppy dog eyes upon him in begging to have it back, but in a mighty showing of parental backbone. Kurama scoffed. You nearly crumbled 6 times when she faked tears. He had toughed it out and secured his position in being able to tell his little girl no. Occasionally. Even if he did let her cuddle up in come bedtime. Softy. He was not. Softy, softy, softy tilde. Speaking of the little magenta-haired little imp, where was she? Concern gripped the base of Naruto's spine, as he recalled the simple law of nature when it came to children of a certain age. When they weren't bugging you, they were probably bugging someone else. Increasing his pace to a jog, he lengthened his stride and extending his senses across the academy to get a fix on her. A metaphysical map took form in Naruto's mind, less an image and more a keen awareness of the life force within the academy, and from their position, a rough map took form in Naruto's mind. He could sense the near dozen life signatures that he recognized and immediately zoned in on Rena's silvery blue fire at the top of the academy, absorbed in her work before taking in the hundreds of other small fragments of glinting blue dotted around and beyond the walls of the academy. That was the other reason why Loretta had so few meetings with Renola, her recent spate of hyper-productivity. After her vigil over Melina had been broken when Marika's consciousness had been yanked back to the Erd Tree, his betrothed had been seized with an all-consuming frenzy of work. For days on end, she would work from morning to night, throwing the totality of her intelligence and hard work behind a litany of projects and busy work that had left the rest of their bizarre little household bewildered. The paramount concern she initially had seemed to be renovating the academy's defenses and infrastructure, for while she had reinstalled and embellished the magical wards, there were parts of the physical masonry and greater internal chambers that had long fallen into disrepair. Usually, this would have meant enlisting a legion of Naruto's clones, but this time, it seemed his fiancée wanted to take on a more proactive approach herself. She had either discovered and reactivated or, more incredibly, built hundreds of automata and golems from scratch to see the mundane realities of building and architecture. At least, that's how it started. While there were still many hundreds of the mechanical menials working away at restoring the academy to the glory of its halcyon days, the queen and headmistress had begun sending contingents of them out into Greater Liurnia for numerous tasks. Both to combat the ne'er-do-wells there but also to building what he had yet to fathom, because the only time any of them had got to see Renola these past weeks was at breakfast, and when she came to bed late, exhausted but looking satisfied. It was the kind of satisfied exhaustion that could only be given after a long, hard day's work. Work towards a project that the raven-haired beauty was devilishly tight-lipped on. What this also meant was most of his nights consisted of the couple spooning against one another in the warm confines of their now shared bed, and that was something Naruto was all too happy to partake in. He soon spotted Melina's spark of rose-gold life force on a nearby battlement next to Millicent's gold and red cadence, and let the awareness of Sage Mode fall away, and he quickly navigated to the needed door. He exited out onto the flat rooftop of what had once been the top of a tertiary inner keep, its once enclosed and turret roof having been worn away by too much time. Naruto grinned in amusement when he laid eyes upon the spectacle before him. "Little up, now to the right," Melina chirped, extending a pudgy finger to direct the behemoth she was sat upon. The little magenta-haired girl was in fine spirits and had taken to her tried and tested pastime of riding atop something, but instead of the red wool for him, she had set her eyes on a far more imposing figure. Stood in the center of the roof space was a large golem made from darkly colored stone, its body thick and blocky with massive arms and bulbous shoulders adhered to either side of its torso, metallic articulated fingers lifting blocks of granite as big as Naruto was tall and arranging them to form a new battlement. Melina sat upon its head, a metallic section of its front that opened to a dark horizontal slit, containing a pair of glowing glintstone eyes peeked out. The golem placed the block down upon the spot that the little girl had indicated, who clapped happily like any girl her age would when playing with toys. "Good job, golly," the little girl praised. Millicent watched her adopted sister with a childish wonderment and sat as she was on one of the dozen or so similar granite blocks that lined the construction area, seemingly bowled over by the simple act of construction utilized on such a grand scale. Approaching from behind, Naruto silently hopped up onto one of the blocks beside the redhead and plopped down next to her. Wide gold eyes whipped around to look at him as his shadow fell over her, and the redhead let out a startled eep. Naruto chuckled. "Hey, I'm not that scary, my spiky hair aside," he said, pantomiming a thorny crown with his fingers on either side of his head that seemed to mellow the daughter of the rot. "I'm not scared of you, father, you just surprised me. You're sneakier than a black knife assassin when you want to be," she trailed off, looking away from him, unable to meet his look. Naruto's smile thinned a modicum, sadness prickling behind his eyes. Ever since her little outburst that one morning, Millicent had seemingly calmed down but always acted a little guarded around him, shy even. It seemed that she viewed herself as somehow to blame for the extreme anger that he had exhibited in the immediate aftermath of discovering that her sisters were hunting her. That did not sit well with Naruto, not at all, so he sought to remedy it through one of the only methods he knew how. "Millicent," he said in a level voice. She flinched, slowly looking up at him. "Why yes, father." He struck like a viper, arms whipping out and snatching the little redhead into his lap before she ever realized what was happening. By the time she had clocked on to the bare implication that she had even moved, he began to rain upon her a combination attack wrought from the fires of hell. An opening salvo of tickles sent her into peals of laughter while a flanking maneuver of well-meaning pokes sent her into a total encirclement of his arms, caught in a genuinely fluffy and tender hug as she giggled. Ph ha 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 fa ha 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 there. Stew. Naruto would not relent, not until he had successfully chased the shadows of misplaced guilt from his daughter and turned that frown upside down, and after softening her up with the initial tickles and cuddles, he came in with the heavy stuff. Head pats. Millicent mewled in contentment, her fiery red locks tamped down by a set of surprisingly dexterous fingers and a truly warm palm that seemed to all but bop any lingering feelings of melancholy from the girl. He knew just the right places to attack, where to scratch and where to rub until Millicent was practically radiating a visible aura of cozy happiness. Melina had paused in her stint in conducting construction to watch, hopping down off the golem to glomp the duo, adding her giggles to the mix. Cycling down from his, in his opinion, masterfully planned assault, he graced his daughters with a sincere smile. Feeling better. The redhead attempted to glower at him but the matching smile pushed through from behind. Yes, father. Good, he replied, hugging both girls to him, though his eyes began to twitch when he saw Melina attempting to rob him of his jacket. No, Melina, you can't have my jacket back. Why not? Melina questioned impishly, sticking her lower lip out, which, combined with her sealed eye, created a powerful side eye. I wore it for so long, and you never took it back. That's 'cause you barely ever took it off, he exclaimed, causing his first daughter to blow a raspberry in his face, thoroughly unconvinced by his logic. He kissed her on the forehead, which placated her for now, preening like a freshly fluffed cat while the golem returned to its autonomous construction, picking up one of the blocks. Did Mama tell either of you what all these golems and puppets are about? Naruto asked both girls, assuming that they had spent more time around them. He received two answers from both girls that were as different as chalk and cheese. Millicent gave him an honest shake of the head, clearly not knowing what was in their collective adopted mother's head. Melina, however. Papa sure is dumb at times, the magenta-haired girl practically scoffed, thumping a hand against Naruto's chest as if to prove a point. She's building a castle, dummy. Having about just enough of his first daughter's sass, a sass she had certainly not inherited from him, Naruto picked up both girls as if they were weightless and placed them on his shoulders. Making for the doorway, he clapped his hands together. Right, seeing as you're so dead set on stealing my jacket again, why don't we see about getting you something to replace it? Less than 20 minutes later saw the trio sequestered away in the cozy confines of Irina's apartments where they were joined by Bogart and the stooped yet tall form of IG the Smith. Irina looked far healthier than she had when she first arrived. Good hygiene and a dietary regime brought some real life back to the blindfolded young woman. Speaking of her blindfold, she had tossed out the dirty strip of medical gauze in favor of a strip of dark blue velvet that was tied around her head, blonde hair flowing freely down her back. So, too, had her main garment changed. The former bizarre traveling habit and gloves she had worn were replaced by a tastefully modest black dress with red filigree below the bust. Bogart, be a dear and thread the needle for me, I need to bring the hem in for reinforcement, Irina said enthusiastically, holding out the small sliver of metal to where she thought the blackguard was and felt it slip from her fingers. Melina let out a burble of discontent from where she stood in front of the Castellan's daughter, who smiled and tickled the little girl. Be still, young lady, lest I poke you with one of the clothes pins, and your new cloak hangs strangely from your graceful shoulders. Naruto watched the interaction from his place on a nearby sofa, leaning back into the pillows. Other than her apparent inclination towards caring for children, Irina had proven to be a surprisingly good seamstress despite her visual impairment, so long as someone was there to handle the elements that she couldn't do. You don't want that, Melina, trust me, Bogart added, biting off a length of black thread with his teeth and threading the needle before handing it back to Irina. You want good-fitting clothes, especially if you find yourself lost in the wilderness for a spell. Watching the blackguard, Naruto found himself again surprised at his features because, for the first time in ages, the surprisingly adept cook had removed his iron helmet, and the initial sight of him had stopped Naruto dead. He was unsure what he had been expecting, but years of wondering what was under Kakashi's mask had predisposed him to the assumption that those who hid their faces were probably either hiding a feature or their own averageness. He hadn't expected, well, someone so damn handsome. Big Bogart was a man in possession of a deep, healthy tan, a large nose and a pointed chin but a rugged handsomeness that made his bright blue eyes punch out like a pair of sapphires set into freshly tilled loam. He sported a short, surprisingly well-maintained beard and wavy dark brown hair that jostled about his face in chin-length bangs. The reason for discarding his characteristic iron helm in private was quite evident. Irina's extremely poor eyesight and choice to wear a blindfold must have made Boggart feel comfortable enough to go without the helmet. His face was free to show the tapestry of emotions that were on display and, knowing that the one he was working with would not see them. And it was a good thing too, because even Naruto, famed for a critical lack of emotional reading at times, could see that Boggart was head over heels for Irina, smitten by her every action. Good for them, Naruto thought, happy that more than just he and Renola had been able to find love in this fucked up land. When he had brought his two daughters to the duo, he had broken them from what he assumed to be a tender moment to ask if they could help make the girls some new clothes, particularly a cloak for Melina to replace his reclaimed jacket. Irina had been all too happy to oblige, and with the assistance of Boggart and IG to bring in the raw supplies, she had already spun a new dark blue hooded cloak with a red lining into life and was now just in the process of taking it in. This required Melina to stand still as Irina adjusted textile pins. Being a little girl, standing still was the last thing his first daughter wanted to do. "You're awfully chipper today, Irina, what's got you so ready to jump to work?" Naruto asked the younger woman, signaling his thanks to IG when the surprisingly spindly troll handed him a steaming cup of tea. "Why not? Moonbrim has received word from my father. He sends glad tidings and thanks to Queen Renola for her hospitality and that he shall make haste to come here once the lingering matters at Castle Morn are rectified," Irina answered, taking the fabric of Melina's hood between her fingers and testing how it pulled once the hood was down. "No more than a month, he believes." Her smile dimmed for a second, routing the misbegotten as proving more taxing than he initially thought. Naruto was about to pry further when she spoke again, turning her blindfolded eyes to face his direction. "As for my enthusiasm, I was made aware by Queen Renola that my services may be called on. I just wasn't expecting it to be by you after I finished with the flags." What flags?" Naruto asked, suddenly confused, which in turn made Irina pause, also confused. She bit her lip. "Her Majesty occasionally sends messages asking small things of me these last weeks, things I am all too happy to do though nothing too difficult and within my ken." IG nodded slowly at Irina's words. "True, the Queen has come to me more than once to put my services to use. She asked me to forge a number of subtle mechanisms for use in her sorceries, though their function I know not and can scarcely parse." The blonde leaned forwards in his chair, looking between the troll, Irina and finally to Boggart who ran a hand through his dark brown hair. "You. Hunting and stocking up the pantries." "All of 'em," Boggart admitted. While it may seem to be a comparatively simple task, when Naruto considered the fact that the academy was a fortress bigger than any fortification back home, barring perhaps Konoha's perimeter wall. That was an astronomical amount of pantries to fill. Renola had been asking all the adults, sans Loretta, to undertake tasks for her with the exception of him. And it was about time he found out why. 0.0.0.0. The skies over Liurnia that night were clear, allowing the crisp night air to roll over the many towers and keeps of Raya Lucaria with nary a whisper, only the light rustle of passing wind that for so many years Naruto had associated with freedom. The stars twinkled down as a morass of gemstones set into the tapestry of the heavens, all seemingly circling around the moon, which was bright and full, looking down over the flourishing little fief with a cool, aloof care, breathing silvery light upon the lakes that reflected back upon the academy, which when combined with the scores of glintstone lamps and lit braziers dotted from walls and windows alike, made the entire structure seem to glow with a mysterious internal light. But it was more than that. There was a power to this place, a tension that went beyond the magical energy that filled the wards that hung over the building like a protective dome. It was charged, a slow buildup of power that was being held in stock for a singular moment that was close at hand. The stars were right, the moon was bright, and before day had broken, the world would know a new light. Upon the surface of the lake, far, far below, the perfect reflection of obsidian and azure was contrasted by a lone dot of gold slowly trailing up the stairs to the topmost turret of the tallest tower. Naruto took a moment to look out over the lakes, awed for the 1000th time at the view the climb to Renola's personal workshop and astronomy tower allowed him. The plains of water with their shifting navy blue and silver surface was dotted with an archipelago of islands formed from what had once been a thriving commune that millennia past must have served as support for the academy and Caria as a whole, now mostly sunk beneath the rising of the lakes. But there were new structures now, fleeting and new. The building blocks of something that the Jinchuriki did not yet know but could still see from this great height. Even now, golems moved through the night, wading through the waters with huge loads of stone held above their heads, sinking them down into the water one after another until a long, snaking causeway ran from the gates to currently halfway across the main lake. Others heaped huge bags of ballast and sand from their shoulders to pile on either side of the causeway to give it stability, while a legion of automata, pinpricks of light at this distance, worked on other structures, floating grids of wood and platforms of netting that bobbed in the wind. Curiosity filled Naruto with childish abandon, threatening to overflow, but he continued his trek up the stairs to the doors of the workshop, finding them unlocked. He pushed one of them open and slipped inside with all the quietness you would expect of a traditional ninja, closing the door behind him. Passing through the well-lit antechamber, he ascended a small flight of stairs before passing through another set of doors into the workshop. He was immediately bathed in the royal blue light of the place, the large open space full of the sounds of work and toil. It was much the same as when he had first been brought in here by Renola to examine his great rooms, the pillars of crystal and domed ceiling, the endless desks, personal libraries and numberless objects of arcane interest, but there were a few things that had not been there before. He looked across the horizontal plane of the room and noted no less than 33 polygonal trinkets floating at obtuse and acute angles in relation to the floor and ceiling. Some of them were uniform icosahedrons made of glintstone while others were metallic contraptions that buzzed and hissed like animals as they went through their clockwork motions. Each one rode upon a singular narrow band of blue-white light that emanated transitory magical dust, all orbiting around the center of the room where Renola stood. Looking at his tall betrothed, Naruto saw that the aloof beauty was once again donned in the raiment as the headmistress of the academy, the billowing dark blue robes and red sash worn around her shoulders. Craning his view up, the blonde also took in the fact that she was wearing her traditional crown as the Queen of Caria as opposed to the shortened one she had taken to wearing when running into battle, the gold causing her pale features to glow with the silver light of the moon. He circled her silently, remaining quiet while she was absorbed in her work, manipulating the bands of light with her nimble fingers moving through esoteric mudras that would make even the most hand-sign proficient shinobi green with envy. 4 additional spectral arms sprouted from her back made of translucent white shadow, each ghostly appendage conjuring a hideously complicated magical circle that non-existent fingers began to comb over like a master pianist. With each completed scholastic and sorcery task, a puff of magical vapor and sparking dust was produced and drawn towards the object at Renola's front. It was a staff that rose up to her clavicle with a greater icosahedron set into its head, suspended within a basket of masterworked gold. And above it, a single shit of golden crystal in a binary orbit with a crystallized drop of blood. 10 whole minutes passed before, finally, the last of the circles vanished, and Renola let out a sigh of contentment, taking a step back from the staff and nodding in satisfaction at her completed work. "What's that?" "Meep," the queen squeaked before whirling on Naruto, ready to unleash a menace of power, only to be brought up short when her dark blue eyes met Naruto's own bright blue pair. She gulped before drawing herself up to her full height, then seeming to remember that this was someone with which she did not have to maintain the guise of the queen. "Oh, Naruto, it doth not do thee well to intrude on a woman's private studies when she is hard at work." Naruto took a deep breath and puffed out his chest, striking a dramatic pose. "And that wouldst be true had thy incessant work not precluded any understanding of it within mine ken," he said, waving his hand to punctuate the Shakespearean turn of phrase. He still hated when people talked like this, but he had been practicing for just such an occasion as this. Renola blinked owlishly. She said, bowled over by the usually plain-speaking Naruto taking a dip into her preferred mode of speech. Seeing that he had her, Naruto advanced across the room and brought his betrothed into a sudden and searing kiss. Her eyes bugged from their sockets for a moment before becoming half-lidded, the tension in her shoulders dropping away as she leaned into the kiss. When they eventually broke for air, Naruto was pleased to see a strong touch of red on his fiancée's cheeks. She sent an interrogatory stare his way, and he cocked his head to one side. "What? Can't I give my girlfriend a kiss when she seems so set on being alone for so long?" His eyes narrowed, "Though I'm more curious about what you've been up to all on your lonesome. Or more like why not involve me?" She turned downcast at that, her crown's tall pinnacle dipping as she pulled away from him. "Forgive me, my love. I have been remiss in telling you the scope of my work, but no, this was not meant to obscure but rather in aid of a surprise I think worthy of you." She led him over to a chaise lounge and sat with him, meeting his gaze all the while. "Will you sit and hear me speak? It shan't take long." He thought on it for a second before nodding and giving the beautiful sorceress his undivided attention. Taking a deep breath, Renola began. "My time speaking with Marika again after so long hath forced me to comprehend some realities about myself and our relationship in the flow of the cosmos. And from this introspection, I have considered 3 truths," she explained, indicating him with her hand and then herself. "Believe it or not, the first reality pertains to your own world." Naruto's ears pricked up at this, sitting up straighter in his chair. "You have spoken at length of the capabilities of your ninjutsu, stretching into the realms of space and time and of your so-called spiritual brother, Sasuke, who walks upon alternate worlds. At the mention of Sasuke, Naruto suppressed the urge to snort, for when he had spoken of the heterochromatic Uchiha, he had used much more colorful language to describe them, most of which involved some variants of the term, stubborn bastard. With that in mind, the reality is that either he or your kinsman from your original world will eventually attempt some form of a trip to the lands between, and were the worst to happen. As they so often do, she added in a depressed flatness, then they may ask you to leave to go back with them. Naruto opened his mouth to interject, primed to tell Renola that he would never abandon her or anyone else, but was stopped when his fiancée held up a hand, begging him to let her continue. Let me finish, my sun and stars, your passion hardens me, but let me tell you what has led to this, she said, sweeping a hand to indicate the constellation of strange objects still floating around staff in the center of the workshop. I know what your reaction will be, and I know that if it were to happen, then other celestial parties may try to twist this unknown variable against us. Thus, some of my actions are to safeguard against this reality. He smiled a wintry smile at that. I'm sure you thought long and hard about it. Call it redundant, but I'm not leaving you. Even if the duck-ass-haired bastard were to drag me kicking and screaming back home, I'd tell them to come right back. Your words harden me, Naruto. But don't pretend that you alone would move heaven and earth to return to my side. Pay heed to days of yore where I did fight against gods for my will, and my love did only strengthen that will. Renola mused, fixing him with an amused side-eye before returning to seriousness. And in remembering who I was before the shattering and what I am now has revealed the second reality that I must remedy. I have neglected my duties. While Naruto watched on with a troubled expression, Renola got to her feet and began to walk a slow circuit around the workshop's central nexus, trailing her hands over various items. When I fell to my madness many centuries ago, I shirked my responsibilities as a queen to mourn the loss of, she caught herself, what I perceived to be the loss of Rani and then the shattering, the Carrion domain withered and became overrun with malign ants I willfully chose to ignore. My knights either perished, found new masters, or simply left for parts unknown. She tapped her crown with the tips of her fingers before gesturing to her robes as the headmistress. And from there the neglect only grew into my role as headmistress of the academy. I should have picked out the foulness taking root in this place before it poisoned this place of learning into a den of intellect-obsessed neophytes who drove the true apostates of the sorcery arts away long before they drove me into my library. Renola, Naruto said sadly, he hated to see her beat herself up over something so many years, nay, centuries post hoc. And that led me to my final reality, informed by that which I have lost and that which I have gained. This world is broken, a shattered husk being played with by outer gods who seem to make sport of the lives of men. But in that world, I have found and made a family again, so it stands that I should make something for them and everybody else to be able to return to. And with that said, she approached the staff in the center of the room and tapped its many-faceted head, producing a melodic chime that rang across the room. The chime did not grow in volume, yet somehow, it seemed to grow thicker by some intangible factor. He could feel the ringing pushing against his ears, his brain, and every other sense, a chalky coldness, permeating his palate as it echoed deeper into his body and mind. Kurama released a startled sound within him, signaling that he too felt the ringing as it connected to even him deep within the depths of Naruto's soul. Leaning forwards, Renola extended her hands and took hold of the infinite strands of weaved spellwork that she had weaved in these last weeks to bring this masterwork ritual to life, and the ritual answered. All across the academy, copious amounts of magical energy that flowed through the wards and buildings were drawn up through the academy, using the many towers and buildings as capacitors to quickly step up the energy first 10, then 100, then 1,000-fold. The entire workshop began to glow a blinding blue-white, the crystalline pillars crackling with power that arced between them before being drawn into the bands of light and passed through the artificial solar system that Renola had constructed around her central staff, flowing faster and faster into its head. Atop the golden basket, the golden chit of crystal and crystallized drop of blood began to emit each of their own internal light and rotated around one another, turning into a band of gold and red light before blurring into a rose-gold energy that reminded him of Melina, he questioned, feeling as if she were standing in the room with them. The Queen of Caria agreed, her voice barely heard over the din of power and wind, a drop of her blood given with her consent and a single gram of my great rune of unbirth, just enough to make use of a system that she was there to lay down when Godfrey was banished all those years ago. She called over the din before with a snap of her fingers the band contracted to a single point of rose gold light. For a solitary instant of time, All was still in the room before the totality of the stored power was channeled through it in a beam of pure power that pierced through the ceiling and far into the sky above. Lowering his arms, Naruto blinked several times to banish black spots from his vision and look at Renola. She stood opposite him and was much the same as before, but to his senses, he saw so much more. His breath hitched in his throat as if seeing her for the very first time. Her visage was overlaid by a luminous figure hewn from moonlight. It wavered and bore cracks of heartache that made his own cry out in pain, but there was so much power, will and love there that he was rendered mute. He knew what this was, for by happenstance or design, whatever Renola had done had initiated a ninshu link between the two as a byproduct. Smiling softly at him, Renola again tapped the gem top of the staff and leaned in towards it. Denizens of the lands between, hearken and take heed, be you highborn or low, misbegotten or true. Be not afraid of my voice, nor the mechanism by which I speak to you, for both shall be explained. To those hosteth not know my voice, know that I am Renola, full moon queen of Caria and headmistress of the Academy of Raya Lucaria, and I have much to say. 0.0.0.0 The round table hold was in uproar. It had been a normal day for the most part. The cozy stitch in reality that many called home was usually lit by a warmth that only the camaraderie of those who called themselves tarnished held for one another. In this place, far away from the worlds above and below, a hollow that had been filled with the shattered remnants of a legion of dreams, and though their dreams had long moved on, the warmth of it was lit by the golden bonfire of grace in the hold's heart, resting upon the round table that gave the place its name. That was how it usually was, anyway. But this night, with nary a whisper of warning, the wonderful golden heart of the hold had undergone a sinister transformation. The once brilliant gold light, crackling like a fire of the heavens light made manifest, had suddenly shifted to a blue silver that lit the entire complex in an eerie glow. After getting over their initial shock, May of the more skittish tarnished, a certain bald cleric hater at the top of the list, had attempted to leave the back to their last touched grace only to discover that it seemed that all grace travel was temporarily suspended by whatever method had turned the grace blue. This had, in turn, led to a borderline riot within the hold between the few followers of the Golden Order present, who claimed this was high blasphemy and that one of the sorcerers present must be to blame. The sorcerers and their traveling companions had drawn swords and staffs and made ready to beat the religious nuts bloody when a strong, gravely voice bellowed out from one of the doorways. "Have you all taken leave of your senses?" shouted Sir Gideon of Nur, the all-knowing, as he stalked out of his study, the blue and silver of the tainted grace reflecting off his armor and helm. "There is a single, solitary rule that must never be broken to take lodging in this hold." He pushed through the throng of tarnished spoiling for a fight and clambered up onto the table to face them all, gesturing at them all with his staff. "Start a fight within the round table hold, and you forfeit the right of hospitality it represents. Whatever this is," he pointed at the blue grace, "it does not override what this place represents, and if you spill blood in here, I shall beat the lot of you so bloody you'll look like Albinorix when I'm done with you," he proclaimed, offering a provocation to any that wanted to try his patience. More than one of the rowdy tarnished put their hands on their sword hits, and one bold Golden Order cleric readied a miracle, but when the all-knowing's gaze fell upon them, each felt a colossal pressure slam down on them, and they backed down. Suddenly, all turned towards the grace as it began to hum, and each man, woman, child and beast felt a voice begin to slip within their minds like an infusion of liquid nitrogen directly into their spinal cords. As Sir Gideon turned to look into the blue grace, the dark abyss of his visor only partially lit by its strange brilliance, they all heard a woman with a regal voice speak. "To those who are beckoned by the grace of gold, tarnished by any other name, forgive me for the confusion you must feel. Thy grace shall return to its auric luster in short order, but in this singular instance, I hath used a canny manipulation of the Eternal's network as to speak to all those who are willing to hear." 0.0.0.0 Rhea didn't like the volcano manor. It was a short-sighted observation she knew, for the volcano manor in Mount Gelmir was all she knew. It was not like it was an uncomfortable place to live. She slept in a warm bed and her belly was always full of the richest meat money could buy. And while her clothes were nothing compared to those of her mother Tanith's, they were still of a fine quality. But then there were the screams. And the blasphemy. And the blood. Oh, the cursed blood. It stank and made the already vivid red lighting and decoration downright oppressive. But she had never mentioned her dissatisfaction to anyone because that might mean she would have to speak with her father. As if on cue, the ground beneath her feet shook as the volcanoes which gave the manor its name rumbled, the lord of blasphemy churning in his molten entrails. Though she did not want to be a bother, she found herself poking her head out of her room and slinking down to her mother's chambers to see what was going on. But upon slipping inside, she noticed something she had never seen before. Not the grace, for Tanith kept one in the heart of her chambers on the off chance a tarnished could be kept in stages of exquisite blasphemy, tenderizing his meat and soul before they joined their family. No, it was that the grace was blue. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. I know that voice, but, no, that isn't possible, she is either long dead or mad. Tanith wailed, her voice echoing from behind her mask. She retreated into her throne and balled her fists against her head. Long centuries have passed since the shattering, and the world has fallen to ruins. From crumbling Farum Azula to the heartland of the Altus Plateau, a sickness has taken root in the land. And I speak not of the scarlet rot that bubbles within Kaled. This sickness is far more insidious and demandable, for it is the inability to build something anew. From Limgrave to Lost Nokron, people are simply making do by living in the shattered remnants of what was or fighting for the scraps of what is. None stopped to wonder for a moment what could be. Queen Renala, Tanith quavered, the entire manor shaking and echoing to the bestial roars of Rykard deep below. Be silent, please, you'll drive your son into a rage. Renala, Rykard, son. I have a grandmother, Rhea said innocently, as many recusants considered how best to commit suicide rather than face the Lord of Blasphemy's anger. 0.0.0.0. The Tarnished ran as fast as his legs could carry him, his lungs were burning, and he was sure that he had torn something in his leg. Looking around him, he could barely parse anything through the thick red mist that rose from the sandy wastes. Kaled's desert was difficult to navigate at midday, let alone midnight, the haze of red vapor and foul scent of rot totally confounding his senses. He heard a bestial roar behind him and bolted in one direction with the vain hope that he had picked the correct flight, staving off a painful death. He had chosen poorly. A black steel greatsword, its curved back as long as the Tarnished was tall, fell upon him like a falling star, splitting him in two from right shoulder to left hip. The two bifurcated halves of his body clattered to the dark sands with a wet splat, enveloped totally in the shadow of the titan that towered over him. It was an imposing figure, impossibly tall and with a wall of pure muscle but with skin as gray as calcified granite and two gold eyes that had been tinged a malefic orange by the rot that squealed under his skin. The darkness of the night was just enough to maintain the illusion of strength, but as the mist shifted, it was clear that the titan panted, collapsing to his knees when the rotted stumps of his feet grew too painful to stand. It hurt, to be unmade. To have your mind slip away from you and your body mouser beneath you. He was forever trapped in that final moment, feeling Melania's blade pierce him and the scarlet Aeonia bloom upon him. So much of who he was had been worn away by time, and every day, he wished for death. But death would not take him. He had been born strong, always the strongest, and even like this, as lessened and weakened as he was, the giant man was simply too much to put down. He would never end his own life, for even with his scant remaining faculties, he knew that there was a task he needed to do. To hold the stars so that they could not hold sway over his family. But the stars grew heavy. As his loyal, skinny steed pawed against him, giving what comfort he could, his monolithic face looked heavenward as if to remind him just what he was fighting for. But it was not the stars that filled his eyes as opposed to the bright full moon, seeming to part the mist over the wastes and bathe him in its familiar cool light. This is a state of the world that I can no longer abide, an insanity that has shaken me from my own life, warmth and the brotherhood of man and beast beneath the light of the sun and moon. This is what I offer. I declare this night the re-establishment of Caria and claim all of Liurnia as our fief. Someone was talking to him in a familiar voice. He did not understand the words, his brain too rotted, but he knew intuitively that it was that of a close friend. Family even. As she talked, he heard but did not listen, letting the voice roll over him until he realized that it was none other than his mother. He did not know how she spoke to him, nor could he speak back, but after so long fighting on alone, the pain of his body and mind fell away to a childish euphoria and calm. It would not last, but for a single, ephemeral moment, General Radon knew peace. 0.0.0.0. Know that I do not seek dominion across the lands, for the dregs of the Golden Order and those who seek to roll in their own feces like common swine are welcome to it. Recognize instead that a queen once more rules and will act to uplift her kingdom and rain the sky's fire upon its enemies with abject abhorrence. I'm not sure if this is a rallying battle cry or the dirge of a cornered animal, Gurman said, using his surprising strength to manhandle a cart off of the ship they had just brought into port. The Radon Festival residents were all too happy to have finished their voyage and were keen to get underway. Jaren spat derisively, checking over his equipment and clearing any remnants of brine from his beard. It's the ravings of a mad woman who forsook her kin and now seeks to kill any that do not follow her mad rule. We stay to course. He inclined the brim of his hat. Of course, I look forward to this hunt. The first hunter said, his feelings not quite meeting his eyes. As he began to walk forwards amidst the litter of adventurers, the burial blade's edge freshly sharpened, he questioned just why this moon felt so different from the one he had known and despised for centuries. 0.0.0.0. But neither queen nor kingdom is fit without subjects, servants and dreams. Thus, I offer, those of you who seek greener pastures, to build something, and once again live as proper folk should then make the journey. Come to my seat at Raya Lucaria and help me build. It has been too long since we have had the right to dream and walk our own path, so please, join your dream with mine and let the heavens sing of a new age beneath the sun and moon. Screams and whoops of need and pleas for release echoed off the dilapidated brick walls of the sewers beneath the capital, hundreds of omen scuttling from their homes and making a beeline for the few exits they knew. Fueled by the promise of freedom and clemency, that they did not have to stay in this wretched place any longer. All met the business end of Morgoth's club, who dragged them back to their cells with a scowl and swish of his burlap cloak. There is but one salvation and clemency in this world, and that is through the Golden Order. Any other path is heresy, he said, his face set in an angry scowl and swatting aside the blue grace. 0.0.0.0. To those who fled from my madness long ago, who were forced away from your homes and place of learning, I ask you to return. Ask, not demand. My malediction may have soured any loyalty you have to me or the Carians, so if you wish to go your own way, I shan't stop thee. But those who come, I offer welcome with open arms. The criminal shall be pardoned, the sick shall be healed and those who wish new life may choose rebirth. Aaagh. The woodsman screamed, flopping against the tree as the long curved head of the scythe severed his spinal cord. He did his best to lever himself up onto his side and lament ever moving to Limgrave since the grafted lord had perished. He finally managed to turn and look up at his assailants, the four red-headed women who had hounded him for hours before finally picking him apart. Why choose rebirth when you need only rot and bloom? Each daughter asked in turn as they drove their blades into the man, their voices layered as if someone was peeking through them. 0.0.0.0. But be weary now ye who listen, of those who even now proclaim blasphemy and sharpen their celestial talons to rend me to offal. To you, greater will, formless mother, rot unyielding and all those who follow you. Darken my door or its people once more, and you shall learn this maxim to be true. That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons, even death may die. Rennala finished her speech with that grave warning and stood still as Naruto watched her, the staff that she had used as an ethereal microphone going inert along with the ringing in his ears. But the Ninshu link persisted, and for now, at least, he could still see all that she was, every emotion and understanding laid bare. Despite himself, he felt Rennala so much as he watched her across the room to stand before him, and his mouth went dry. You wish to make a kingdom for us, he stated, having felt the fire in her words, her heart beating as one with his. I do, and I will, she replied, her words with a dreamlike tenor. After a moment, she slipped a hand and drew out a pair of objects wrapped in cloth that she held out to him. I always seem to be giving you trinkets, don't I? Naruto chuckled. I'm not complaining, Rennala. Go ahead. The blonde undid the fine cloth and stared down at the ring there, a perfect match for the one sitting on Rennala's hand. But his mouth went dry when he saw what it sat on. His gaze snapped back up to meet hers. A small, tentative smile awaited him, fragile as glass. I considered asking IG to fashion a crown, but I felt this was far more fitting. Naruto lifted the silver plate affixed to a blue cloth. It was a forehead protector, but it was one unlike any he had ever seen. Instead of the leaf it held the crossed sword and staff of the Carrion coat of arms, yet they were now crossed over a familiar spiral placed into the metal. Suddenly, it all clicked for him, the talk of new flags and kingdoms. Oh. 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 His eyes widened. Rennala. She doesn't do anything by half measures, does she? Well, my son, the queen asked, her face drawing close to his, will you be my king when the time comes? Naruto drew closer and closer until their lips were a hair's breadth apart. Only then did he dare smile. Till the heavens fall, my moon. Their lips met with a static charge, mouths meshed together passionately, arms slipping around each other in a fiery embrace. Though the Ninshu bond was temporary, it was the perfect catalyst to being their passions to the fore, it was an inevitability. So in the topmost turret of the tallest tower, surrounded by arcane knowledge in a world with a moderately brighter future, moon eclipsed the sun to make love. The stars may be still, but this night belonged to them. A singular eye surveyed the space before it in slow, sweeping looks, the beautiful dance of light, color and shadow producing a microcosm within its multifaceted orbit. The eye was cyan and glowing with an internal bioluminescence that was striking at any time of day. It shifted ever so slightly, its midnight black pupil expanding and contracting subtly, a range of movements that on their own were academic but when paired with a blue-white eyebrow furrowing gave off a prominent feeling, giving credence that the eyes were the windows to the soul. And in this precise moment, that soul vibrated with awkwardness. Rani was embarrassed, it rolled off her in waves as she sat at the table for breakfast. She wore her usual white dress that had recently been returned to her after Irina had taken it in to better reflect her new height, her long blue-white hair having been brushed from its usual wavy locks and instead gathered in a low ponytail to reflect the new season. Lifting a fork to her lips, she nibbled on a savory treat that Bogart had been so good as to prepare for them all for breakfast. There had been no general announcement or pre-arranged agreement that had called everyone to the dining hall of Renala's apartments, and in point of fact for some of the residents of the academy it was quite a hike, especially when you only had the short legs of a child, but here they all sat. Rani counted them all as she swept the table. Blaive, wearing a simple leather jerkin, sat to her immediate right, doing his best to remain civilized at the bounty of food on the plate in front of him. Next was Bogart himself, who, quite humorously, wore his iron helm even with a pair of pajamas, having to surreptitiously feed the food through a slut in the mask. Though he seemed much more focused on the dressing-gown-clad Irina to his own right, who satisfied herself with some toast. To her left sat the other children. Selin and Millicent exchanged furtive looks while Melina went to town on her breakfast between them. Radagon's red wolf could be seen slumped at one end of the long wooden table, still snoozing in the morning lethargy left over from its recently vacated slumber. To the Dark Moon Princess's immense surprise, Loretta had decided to join them and sat at the other end of the table, some distance from the rest of the residents. Moonbrim sat between them as the metaphorical boundary. Blinking again, Rani found herself wondering if Naruto's pet giant crayfish had attempted to scale the walls to get up this high and join them, the mental image of which nearly made her chuckle despite her embarrassment. Sighing internally, she finally turned to address the cause of the feeling that permeated the room. "Oi oi, I can feed myself." Naruto chuckled, bobbing and weaving out of the way of a breakfast-laden spoon. Renala smirked. "Nonsense, dear sun and stars, thou needeth to learn how to be pampered. Tea's too early for grapes, so I'll have to make do with breaking your fast," she said, continuing her humorous assault, displaying a remarkable dexterity with the utensil. It darted back and forth, a metallurgic viper with love and affection as its fangs, rolling from one finger to the next as it sought the whiskered visage of its prey. Naruto playfully slapped it aside, but his eyes glittered when the queen simply caught the utensil in her other hand, its cargo still in place, and swept it forwards to wait at Naruto's lips, now twitching into an amused rictus. "Fine, you win," he huffed before opening his mouth and eating the offered food, letting out a contented hum as he chewed it. "There, happy?" he questioned good-naturedly. "'Tis a fine start," her mother chirped in reply, her porcelain face, a beauty that Rani had not even been able to duplicate when she was porcelain, flush with enjoyment. This sickeningly sweet interaction had been going on since they had all sat down for breakfast, and try as she might, Rani couldn't school her features perfectly to shut out the cringe she felt at having to watch her mother flirt. However, she took solace in the fact that she was doing a damn sight better than Loretta, whose teeth could be heard grinding against one another from the far end of the table. All had their own reactions to it that ranged from amused smiles to deeply uncomfortable stares, and the fact that the pair of lovers seemed to care not a jot for the opinions of the peanut gallery was admirable. Ah, yes, lovers. Though she had never been intimate with another in that way, even when she still possessed her original body, Rani knew what sex was as well as the telltale signs of when people had given into their urges. And part of the reason why she was thinking in such analytical yet roundabout terms was that the pair were figuratively lighting up the entire room with their mutual glow. She was centuries old and growing used to this new body now, yet despite her best efforts, her cheeks dusted with embarrassed pink. "Damn ye blasted blood flow. Relent from mine cheeks post haste," she mentally ordered obliquely, her secondary set of hands clenching under the tablecloth. At least she was not alone in her embarrassment, for all of her sisters sported similar shades of red on their pale cheeks. Casting a glance at Melina, she saw the magenta-haired sire of Marika and Radagon continue to munch away on her breakfast, blissfully ignorant of her sister's plight. Ignorance was bliss after all. "Okay, now I'll do you," Naruto scooping up a portion of his own food and offer. "Oh, to hell with it," Rani thought, deciding to be the one to break the infernal pleasantries even if it would set the focus of both of her parents squarely on her. "Ahem, She cleared her throat, causing all to turn to her slightly. Naruto looked at Rani and raised an eyebrow. While the morning is indeed very merry, father. HRK. It seemed it was still new to him as well. Good, let him take some embarrassment as well. Emboldened by the empathetic link, Rani pushed on, let us address the reindeer in the room. Yes, that, the more likely reason as to why everyone had made their way to breakfast that morning and endured the lovers' play, the declaration. Naruto straightened in his seat but lost none of his jovial warmth. I knew it was going to come up sooner or later, but we both had our hands full last night, he said, earning him an elbow in the ribs from Renola. Your mother's fancy words aside, I got the gist of it and then some. Rebuild the kingdom. Everyone shifted slightly in their seats, a chorus of unsaid questions and worries filling the empty air. The majority of them who had heard her mother's speech through the grace the prior night were more used to the eloquent speech of the First Estate and were aware of the sheer weight of what Renola had stated, offered and threatened in a singular sovereign soliloquy. Rani, however, was not satisfied with the laconic summary, mostly because it did not do justice to anything, least of all her own annoyance. I was just falling asleep when her words reached me. I thought for a moment that I were having his conniption, she thought. In my wildest dreams I could have never foreseen that mother would be willing to do something so bold. The prospect of something so simple seems impossible after epochs under a rotting reality. Rolling out of bed, she had utilized the wards to translate herself to her mother's apartments within the beat of her hammering heart, desperate to ask why, when and how. She wanted to help, of course, but the difference between stating your intent and actually doing it was like heaven and earth. Haste had morphed into distress upon finding her mother's apartments barred with wards and protections so thick, old and complex it would have taken her an hour just to get through one. Fear had taken her then, fear that this was some form of relapse to her prior madness. Rani had been, as they say, groggy and out of it. All these hours later it was quite obvious that Renola was in sound mind, but she had still climbed to the top window and attempted to peek inside and see. No, nope, not a jot of that memory I shall see again. Out ye blasted engram. Her cheeks turned atomic. While she hadn't seen anything per se, you couldn't mistake the creaking of bed springs and the tantric clap of love-making. She glared at Naruto with all the venom she could muster. With her miniature form, she looked like a miffed snowman. As far as Rani was concerned, as the one who had likely prompted her mother and thus made Rani lose a night's sleep trying to purge the memories of what she knew happened between them from her mind, the onus was on Naruto to explain. Call it due recompense. With the academy rebuilt and up to snuff, it becomes the heart of a rebuilt kingdom. Is that the right word given? You're the queen. The blonde looked at the pale queen who nodded encouragingly. Make it a centerpiece from which people can come, live and expand out from within the boundaries of the country and actually be able to make something stable amongst the lands between. That would explain the push to renovate so much in the past weeks and months, Rani conceded. Naruto nodded. Yeah, seems kinda obvious in hindsight. Godric's assault, if you can call it that, did more damage to his own pride than the castle itself, so I guess it was just the shove needed to fix everything. As magnificent as the academy was even in a decrepit state, it was a far cry from the sheer majesty it had been prior to the shattering. A burble of conversation broke over the table then, with everyone giving their own opinions and thoughts on the idea, which ranged from idealized return to glory days of yore to more realistic questions of how such a thing would even be achieved. At that, Renola finally broke her silent vigil to answer. I'm sure thou all hath questions, but take heed and I shall do my best to answer all, my dear subjects and household. There was a rich undertone of royal decree to her words that sent a shiver up Rani's spine. Placing her spent utensils down on her plate and pushing it away from herself, she took a moment to compose herself and make sure everyone was listening. She nodded imperceptibly, then she began to speak. As all gathered from last night's proclamation, I am of the firm belief that this worldly state of affairs hath persisted for too long. I doth not seek domination over the lands, for if apostates to the Elden throne seek to squeal in their own filth to sit in Marika's vacant throne and rule over a world of dust, they art welcome to it. What I seek, is to re-establish my right to rule over Liurnia as it my right as its true monarch. I have the power, the mandate, the wisdom and intent to make a place with sense to it, not just being content with living in the remnants of what once was. Rani winced. Old guilts at sending the world to its current state were still fresh in this new flesh. But her mother cast no scorn upon her. It is also not simply wishful thinking. The academy is the most substantial fortress in all of Liurnia, surpassing even the old Carrion hold. It is protected by defenses both magical and natural, she explained, referring to the lakes. And in all likelihood, much more than that. While Rani was not her eldest brother, she knew a little of how natural geography could prove to be your greatest ally or your worst enemy in a wartime setting. The overabundance of the namesake lakes in conjunction with the perimeter rock formations meant that there were only specific directions from which you could approach the academy from specific directions if they did not know the right paths. If they stepped off the paths, then they were likely to get ripped to shreds by one of the many, many hungry and powerful beasts that called the lakes home. She spared a glance for Naruto, who listened on with everyone else, unless you're so strong or dense that you warp causality around you. From this central power base, a settlement can quite easily be constructed in the shadow and protection of the walls, a task that my golems have been setting to these past weeks. Rennala continued, referring to the expanding lattice of wooden supports and stone causeways that were growing out from the foot of the walls like a spiderweb. In time it will sprout into a castle town, then a city. And when people hear that there's a place where they don't have to worry about their neighbor stoving in their skull for a fistful of runes, they will come this way and put down roots. Naruto chipped in. More than that, love. Rennala patted his shoulder. A kingdom is supported by its people, but they won't come if a tyrant waits for them. What will draw them here and stay is what we will have to offer. Safety, protection, and a way to heal from the fundamental to the esoteric, at the hands of the crown jewels of this world. Quickly connecting the dots, Ranni shot a searching look at her mother. You plan to use the great rune. Peace, little Culver, I am not drunk on power or maddened. Much of my time spent on my lonesome was spent researching a way to utilize the rune of unbirth in a safe way that left neither the caster nor recipient bereft of their faculties, and as you and Selen can attest, it is not impossible. Ranni huffed while Selen looked curious. I hope to see your research on the matter, mother. Can you promise you won't use it for your own random experiments? Naruto asked dryly, though the silence that followed was telling. So long as it's safe, and believe you me, I will check if it's safe, I don't see a problem. Ranni's mother silently thanked her paramour, basking in his golden grin. As it stands right now, what is needed is a solid foundation and subjects. Once they set down their roots, we will have manpower to develop the kingdom even in our absence, meaning we can turn our attention to matters long overdue. Her voice tinged with pain. Realization struck the Dark Moon Princess like a bolt from the blue, her mouth falling open. You speak of my brothers. I do, her mother agreed, her eyes solemn but no less bright. She was resigned to do right by her lost sons even if it brought her pain. Dereliction of duty cannot be undone with continued neglect. I will face what remains of our family with open arms, both mine and Radagon's. Frowning at the words, Ranni looked down at her empty plate. I fear that they may be beyond saving, as much as it pains me to say it. Despite the morose tone the conversation had taken, Naruto spoke on his betrothed's behalf. If we have to smack some sense into them, then we have to smack some sense into them. It wouldn't be the first time I've pried absolution from the jaws of tyrants. Everyone in the room fixed Naruto with a perplexed look. What? Naruto asked, a bead of sweat dripping down the back of his neck. Blade was the one to answer his friend, chuffing in amusement. Nothing, friend, it's just I wager that's the most eloquent thing you've ever said. Oh, piss off, dog breath. Everyone laughed, even Ranni and Loretta offered a titter and a chuckle respectively. A beat passed before the knight of the Haligtree suddenly froze, her face alight with sudden understanding, having finally clocked what Rennala had said. I will face what remains of our family with open arms, both mine and Radagon's. You intend to save Lord Mikela and Lady Melania as well? The statuesque woman inquired. Millicent flinched at the mention of her mother, and to Loretta's credit she immediately noticed, forgive me, young Millicent. Sir Moongram has told me of your terse history with your rotted kin. 'Twas not my intent to cause you distress. Millicent swallowed thickly, taking a deep breath, and Ranni felt empathy for the little redhead. It's fine, Miss Loretta. Loretta offered a wan smile before returning to Rennala. Truly, I would think you would have issues with Lady Melania. Oh, I do, Rennala assured, a small darkness in her eyes,